In 1762, a book was published that would ignite revolutions, topple monarchies, and reshape the entire political landscape of the Western world. Its author wasn't a general, a king, or a religious leader. He was a paranoid, self-educated watchmaker's son who abandoned his own children and died convinced the world was conspiring against him. His name was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and the ideas in his head would lead to more bloodshed than almost any other philosopher in human history. The French Revolution, the Reign of Terror, the rise of totalitarian ideologies in the 20th century. All of them traced their intellectual lineage back to this one man's vision of freedom, equality, and the general will. But here's the disturbing question nobody wants to ask. What if Rousseau's most dangerous idea wasn't wrong by accident? What if the path from his philosophy to the guillotine was inevitable? What if the very concept of forcing people to be free contains within it the seeds of every modern tyranny? June 28, 1712, Geneva. A child enters the world and his mother leaves it. Isaac Rousseau, a watchmaker, holds his newborn son Jean-Jacques and whispers words the boy will hear repeated throughout his childhood. "You cost me my wife." The guilt starts here, before memory, before language. It will never leave. Geneva in 1712 is not Switzerland as we know it. It is a Calvinist republic, austere and rigid, where pleasure is suspect and salvation uncertain. Isaac Rousseau is not a typical Genevan. He reads novels, loves dancing, gets into fights. He teaches his son to read using his dead wife's romance novels. They stay up all night reading together, father and son, living in fantasies while the Calvinist city sleeps its disciplined sleep. When Jean-Jacques is 10, everything changes. His father gets into a dispute with a French captain. Rather than face the Genevan authorities, Isaac flees the city. He abandons his son. Jean-Jacques will not see him again for years. The pattern is set. The men in his life disappear, and he learns that love means loss. The boy is sent to live with his uncle. Then he is sent to a pastor in the countryside for education. Then at 13, he is apprenticed to an engraver named Émile Ducomun. If Isaac Rousseau was mercurial and affectionate, Ducomun is the opposite. He is brutal. He beats the boy. He humiliates him. Jean-Jacques, who has been raised on romantic novels and paternal affection, now learns about arbitrary power and daily cruelty. He steals. Small things at first: apples, asparagus, a ribbon. When the ribbon theft is discovered, he blames a servant girl. She is punished. He watches. He says nothing. Decades later, he will write about this moment in his confessions, the shame still raw. But at 13, he pushes the guilt down and continues stealing. Not because he needs anything, but because the act of taking something forbidden gives him a feeling of control in a life where he has none. March 14th, 1728. Jean-Jacques is 15. He returns late from a walk outside the city walls. The gates are closed. He has been locked out before and punished. He knows what awaits him if he returns in the morning. In this moment, standing outside the closed gates of Geneva, he makes a decision. He does not go back. He walks away. He will not return to Geneva for years. He simply leaves his entire life behind. He wanders. A teenage boy with no money, no connections, no plan. He walks to Savoy, to Catholic country, to enemy territory for a Genevan Protestant. In the village of Confignon, a priest directs him to Annecy, to a woman named Françoise Louise de Warrants. She is in her late 20s, beautiful, separated from her husband, living on a pension from the King of Savoy for bringing Protestant converts to Catholicism. She is a collector of lost souls and young men. Madame de Warrants looks at the awkward, intense teenage boy on her doorstep. She sees a project. She sends him to Turin, to a hospice for converts. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, raised in the rigidly Protestant city of Geneva, converts to Catholicism. Does he believe? It hardly matters. He is 16 and has nowhere else to go. Religion at this point is about survival, not salvation. Turin. He works as a servant in aristocratic households. He experiences the vast gulf between the rich and everyone else. He sees how the powerful treat those who serve them. He is sexually initiated, though the details are characteristically strange. A shopkeeper's wife uses him for her pleasure, and he discovers he enjoys submission, even humiliation. This sexual peculiarity will stay with him for life, complicating his relationships, feeding his sense of being different, wrong, outside normal society. He leaves Turin and returns to Madame de Warrants. She takes him in. For the next decade, with interruptions, she will be the center of his life. He calls her maman, mother. She calls him petit, little one. Eventually, when he is in his early 20s, their relationship becomes sexual. She initiates it casually, as if adding a new dimension to their arrangement. For Rousseau, it is more complicated. He is sleeping with the woman he calls mother, and the confusion of roles will echo through his later writings about women, sexuality, and proper relations between the sexes. But these years with Madame de Warrants are the happiest of his life. She supports his education. He reads voraciously, without system or guidance, which means he educates himself according to his own interests and instincts. He reads philosophy, mathematics, music, history, Latin. He becomes an autodidact, which means he will always think slightly differently from those trained in universities and academies. He will never quite fit into intellectual establishments. He studies music. He becomes obsessed with it. He even invents a new system of musical notation, which he is convinced will revolutionize music. It does not. But the attempt shows something important about Rousseau. He believes he can reinvent fundamental systems through pure thought. If musical notation is inefficient, he will create a better one. If society is corrupt, he will imagine a better one. This confidence, untethered from institutional training, will be both his strength and his curse. The idyll cannot last. Madame de Warrants takes another young man into the household. Rousseau is jealous. Her money troubles worsen. In 1740, at 28, Rousseau leaves Annecy. He becomes a tutor in Lyon. He is not good at it. He is too impatient, too caught up in his own head. After a year, he quits and goes to Paris. Jean-Jacques Rousseau arrives in Paris at age 30. He has no position, no patron, limited money. He has his new system of musical notation and enormous confidence in it. He presents it to the Academy of Sciences. They reject it. The system, they explain politely, is not actually an improvement. It is arguably worse than existing notation. This rejection should have ended his Paris ambitions. It does not. Rousseau stays. He becomes a secretary to the French ambassador to Venice. This lasts a year before he quarrels with the ambassador and leaves in anger. The pattern is emerging. Rousseau cannot maintain professional relationships. He is too sensitive, too quick to perceive insult, too certain of his own rightness. Back in Paris, he drifts. He writes articles on music for the Encyclopédie being compiled by Denis Diderot and Jean-Laurent d'Alembert. He befriends Diderot. He becomes part of the philosophe circle, the intellectuals and freethinkers who are beginning to question everything about French society. He is on the margins of this world, not quite accepted, not quite rejected, always a bit outside. In 1745, he begins a relationship with Thérèse Levasseur. She is a laundress at his hotel, barely literate, from a poor family. The philosophes are scandalized. Why would Rousseau, who moves in intellectual circles, attach himself to this simple woman? But Rousseau is more comfortable with her than with society ladies. She does not judge him. She does not expect brilliant conversation. She accepts him. Over the next years, Thérèse becomes pregnant 5 times. 5 children are born. Rousseau takes each baby to the foundling hospital and leaves it there. All 5 of his children are abandoned to institutions where most children die. Thérèse apparently agrees to this, or at least does not stop it. Rousseau later justifies this by saying he could not afford children, that they would have turned out badly given his circumstances, that the foundling hospital would educate them better than he could. The philosophes do not know about the abandoned children yet. That revelation comes later. For now, in the late 1740s, Rousseau is just another struggling writer in Paris, approaching 40, with nothing significant published, no reputation, no achievement. He is about to become famous. The revelation at Vincennes, a philosophy born in a flash. October 1749. The road to Vincennes is dusty and hot. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is walking the several miles from Paris to the fortress at Vincennes, where his friend Denis Diderot is imprisoned. Diderot has been locked up for writing irreligious things, and Rousseau visits him regularly. Rousseau carries with him a copy of the Mercure de France. He is reading as he walks. He comes to an announcement. The Academy of Dijon is sponsoring an essay contest. The question: has the progress of the sciences and arts contributed to the corruption or purification of morals? It is the kind of question academies ask, expecting learned defenses of progress and civilization. The answer is supposed to be obvious. Of course, sciences and arts improve humanity. This is the Enlightenment. Progress is the watchword. Rousseau stops walking. Something happens. He will later describe it as a sudden illumination, a vision so powerful it overwhelms him. He sees everything inverted. What if progress has not improved humanity but corrupted it? What if civilization, arts, sciences, all the things educated people celebrate, have made humans worse, not better? What if we were happier, better, more virtuous before all of this? He sits under a tree. He is weeping. Ideas flood through him faster than he can process them. He later claims he saw in that moment the entire system of thought he would spend his life elaborating. Whether this is true or retrospective dramatization hardly matters. Something shifts in Rousseau on the road to Vincennes. He finds his voice, his angle, his attack. He arrives at the fortress. He tells Diderot about the essay question. Diderot, always practical, asks what position Rousseau will take. Everyone else will defend progress, Diderot says. Take the opposite side. It will stand out. Whether Diderot is genuinely advising contrarianism or whether Rousseau is already convinced, we do not know. The story gets told different ways, but the result is certain. Rousseau will argue that sciences and arts corrupt morals. He writes the essay in a fever. The discourse on the sciences and arts is not a careful academic argument. It is an assault. Everything the Enlightenment celebrates, Rousseau attacks. Learning makes people dishonest because they learn to hide their true thoughts. Arts make people soft and weak. Civilization replaces virtue with politeness, genuine feeling with performance. Ancient Sparta, ignorant and martial, was superior to Athens with all its philosophy and theater. The best humans were the least educated. The argument is not entirely original. Plenty of moralists have complained about luxury and decline, but Rousseau's version has an intensity and totality that goes further. He is not just saying we have too much luxury. He is saying the entire project of civilization is corrupt. We have taken a wrong turn as a species. Everything we are proud of is actually our sickness. In July 1750, the Academy of Dijon announces its decision. Jean-Jacques Rousseau wins first prize. He is 37 years old. He has published nothing of significance before. Suddenly he is famous. The essay is published. It creates a sensation. People are outraged, delighted, confused. Who is this Rousseau who attacks everything educated people believe? The philosophers are split. Some admire the rhetorical brilliance. Others see it as a betrayal of Enlightenment values. King Stanislaw of Poland writes a refutation. Rousseau writes a response to the king. More refutations appear. Rousseau responds to those too. He is suddenly at the center of European intellectual debate. But fame creates a problem. Rousseau is arguing that civilization corrupts, that sciences and arts make us worse, that simplicity and virtue require ignorance. Yet here he is, a man of letters, living in Paris, participating fully in civilized intellectual life. The contradiction is obvious. His critics point it out immediately. If civilization is so corrupt, why are you living in its center? If arts and learning are bad, why are you writing essays? Rousseau takes the criticism seriously, perhaps too seriously. He begins to reform his life according to his principles. He gives up his job as cashier to a wealthy tax collector. He will support himself by copying music, simple manual labor. He gives up fine clothes and wears simple outfits. He refuses dinner invitations to aristocratic salons. He is making himself into a living embodiment of his philosophy. The philosophers watch this with a mixture of admiration and alarm. Diderot thinks his friend is taking things too far. Grimm, another friend, worries about Rousseau's judgment. But Rousseau is adamant. He will not be a hypocrite. If he believes civilization corrupts, he will remove himself from it as much as possible while still surviving. He keeps writing. The Academy of Dijon sponsors another essay contest in 1753. This one asks about the origin of inequality among men and whether it is authorized by natural law. Rousseau enters again. This time his essay does not win. It is too long, too radical, too strange. But when published in 1755 as the Discourse on the Origin and Basis of Inequality Among Men, it becomes his most important work so far. Where the first discourse attacked civilization in general terms, the second provides a theory of how humans went wrong. Rousseau imagines the state of nature, the condition of humans before society. This is speculative anthropology, philosophy disguised as natural history. Rousseau admits he has no real evidence for any of this. He is imagining what humans might have been like before civilization, and from that imagined state, explaining how we became what we are. In the state of nature, Rousseau's humans are solitary. They wander alone through forests. They have no language, no reason as we understand it, no society. They are barely different from animals. But they have two crucial qualities. First, self-preservation. Second, pity, a natural aversion to seeing other creatures suffer. These two qualities are all the morality necessary for isolated natural humans. Natural man has no property because he has no concept of ownership. He picks fruit when hungry, drinks from streams, sleeps where he is tired. He has no vanity because he never compares himself to others. He has no jealousy, no ambition, no anxiety about the future. He lives entirely in the present moment. He is, in Rousseau's telling, content. Then comes the catastrophe. Humans begin to live near each other. Language develops. Comparisons become possible. Someone notices they are stronger or faster or more attractive than another. Vanity is born. Then someone encloses a piece of land and says, "This is mine." Others accept this claim. Property is born. With property comes inequality. Some have more, some less. Those with less must work for those with more. Dependence is created. Freedom is lost. The second discourse ends with a vision of corrupted humanity, vain, anxious, enslaved by opinion, judging ourselves through others' eyes, having lost all natural liberty and equality. We are rich and miserable, civilized and wretched. The entire structure of society, laws, property, government rests on a fraud. The powerful have convinced the weak that the current arrangement is natural and necessary. It is neither. Reading this in 1755, people are stunned. The implications are revolutionary. If property is theft, if inequality is artificial, if laws protect the strong against the weak, then the entire social order is illegitimate. Rousseau has not yet proposed a solution. That comes later in The Social Contract. For now, he has only diagnosed the disease, and the diagnosis is terminal. Voltaire receives a copy of the Second Discourse. He writes to Rousseau, "I have received your new book against the human race. Never has so much intelligence been used to make us stupid. Reading your book makes one want to walk on all fours." The tone is mocking, but Voltaire has identified something real. Rousseau is arguing that our highest achievements are our deepest mistakes. Becoming human, becoming civilized was the wrong path. We should have stayed animals. Rousseau and Voltaire will never reconcile. They represent opposed visions of enlightenment. Voltaire wants to perfect civilization through reason, tolerance, and reform. Rousseau thinks civilization itself is the problem and cannot be perfected, only escaped or radically restructured. The split between them is the split in enlightenment thought itself, the tension between improvement and rejection, reform and revolution. By 1755, Rousseau is one of the most discussed thinkers in Europe. He is also becoming impossible to be around. His sensitivity to criticism has become paranoia. His insistence on living according to his principles has become rigidity. His friendships are strained. He quarrels with people over small matters and cannot let go of perceived slights. The man who diagnosed humanity's sickness is himself becoming sick. The question is whether the sickness came from the diagnosis or the diagnosis from the sickness. The state of nature, inventing the natural man. Rousseau's natural man is a fiction. Rousseau knows this. He admits it in the Second Discourse. He writes that we must set aside all the facts, because facts are irrelevant to his inquiry. He is not doing anthropology or history. He is doing philosophy. He is imagining what humans must have been like in order to explain what they are now. This methodological move is crucial. Rousseau is inventing a thought experiment and presenting it as if it reveals something true about human nature. Whether natural man ever existed does not matter. What matters is that imagining him allows Rousseau to critique existing society by showing how far we have fallen from our original state. So what is this natural man like? He is alone. This is the first and most important fact. He does not live in groups, families, tribes. He wanders the forests in isolation, encountering other humans occasionally but forming no lasting bonds. He mates opportunistically and moves on. Mothers care for infants until they can survive alone, then the bond dissolves. There is no society because there is no need for society. Natural man has no language. Language requires society, and society requires language. In isolation, there is nothing to talk about. Natural man communicates, if at all, through cries and gestures sufficient for immediate needs. He has no abstract thought because abstract thought requires language. He cannot plan for the distant future. He lives entirely in the present. He has no morality in the sense we understand it. He has no concept of good and evil, justice and injustice, property and theft. These concepts require social life, but he has two innate qualities that serve as the foundation for morality once society develops. The first is self-preservation, the instinct to maintain his own existence. The second is pity, an instinctive revulsion at seeing another creature suffer. Pity is crucial to Rousseau's argument. It prevents natural man from being a Hobbesian monster. Thomas Hobbes had argued that the state of nature was a war of all against all, that natural man was violent and life was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Rousseau rejects this completely. Natural man is peaceful precisely because he is isolated. He has no reason to fight. He has no property to defend, no honor to maintain, no comparisons to make. Conflicts are rare and quickly resolved by one party simply leaving. Natural man is healthy. He eats when hungry, drinks when thirsty, sleeps when tired. He has no chronic diseases because he is constantly active. He has no venereal diseases because sex is casual and brief. He has no anxiety or depression because he has no past to regret or future to fear. He is, in a real sense, like an animal, utterly present, instinctual, content. Rousseau pushes this further. Natural man is free. He depends on no one. He owes nothing. His wants are limited to what nature provides, and nature provides enough. He has no master, no superior, no one who can command him. This is genuine freedom, the absence of dependence on the will of another. Everything that comes later, all of civilization, will involve creating dependencies and thus destroying freedom. Natural man is equal. Since there is no society, there is no comparison. One man may be stronger than another, but this creates no inequality because the weaker man simply avoids the stronger. Strength gives no permanent advantage. There is no property to accumulate, no position to inherit, no way for differences to become structural. Critics immediately attack this picture. Where is the evidence? Which humans ever lived this way? Rousseau's response is that evidence is beside the point. He is reasoning from human nature, not from observation. We know what humans are capable of now. Work backward. Remove society, remove language, remove reason in its developed form. What is left? That is natural man. But this creates a problem. If natural man is stupid, isolated, barely above an animal, how does he become civilized? What is the mechanism of change? Rousseau needs to explain the transition from state of nature to state of society without making society seem inevitable or natural. If society is natural, then his critique loses force. Society must be artificial, a deviation from our nature, but it must also be explicable. Rousseau's answer involves accidents and contingencies. Chance events push humans together. Perhaps climate changes make cooperation necessary. Perhaps population growth means isolation is no longer possible. In any case, humans begin to live near each other. They begin to cooperate for hunting or defense. Language develops gradually, allowing more complex coordination. Once humans live together, everything changes. Comparisons become possible. One person notices they sing better than another, or run faster, or are more attractive. The desire for esteem is born. Humans begin to perform for each other, to seek approval, to fear contempt. Vanity enters the world. What others think of us starts to matter more than what we actually are. Metallurgy and agriculture arise. These are, for Rousseau, the twin disasters. Agriculture creates surplus, which creates the possibility of accumulation. Metallurgy creates tools that make agriculture more productive. Now, not everyone needs to grow food. Specialization becomes possible. Some people farm, some make tools, some do other tasks. A division of labor emerges. Then comes the crucial moment. Someone encloses a piece of land and says, "This is mine." Others, instead of laughing at this absurd claim or ignoring it, accept it. They recognize the claim. Property is born. The true founder of civil society, Rousseau writes, was the first person who enclosed land and found people simple enough to believe him. This person is not a hero, but a criminal. Property is the original crime. Once property exists, inequality becomes structural. Those with more land accumulate more wealth. Those with less must work for those with more. The rich get richer. The poor become dependent. Natural equality is destroyed. And with inequality comes all the vices: envy, greed, pride, contempt, exploitation. Natural man, stupid and content, becomes civilized man, intelligent and miserable. We gain reason but lose instinct. We gain language but lose presence. We gain society but lose freedom. We gain wealth but lose equality. Every advance in civilization is simultaneously a loss. Progress is decline. This is Rousseau's fundamental insight, the idea that will make him famous and dangerous. What if the entire story of human progress is actually a story of human corruption? What if civilization is not the solution but the problem? What if we have been moving in the wrong direction for thousands of years? The implications are revolutionary. If the current order is built on historical crimes, if property is theft, if inequality is artificial, then everything can be questioned. Nothing is sacred. No institution is legitimate just because it exists. The entire edifice of society rests on foundations that are, in Rousseau's analysis, fraudulent. But Rousseau is not yet calling for revolution. The second discourse is diagnosis, not prescription. He is showing how we got sick. He has not yet explained how we might be cured. That comes later in the social contract, where he will attempt to imagine a legitimate society, one that preserves something like natural freedom within the constraints of civilization. For now, in the 1750s, he has simply told a story. Natural man, alone and free, the accidents that bring humans together, the catastrophe of property, the descent into inequality and dependence. It is a myth, but myths shape how we see the world. And this myth, once believed, makes revolution thinkable. If we fell from a better state, perhaps we can return to it, or create something new that recovers what was lost. Rousseau's natural man will haunt European thought for centuries. Romantics will embrace him as the authentic self beneath social masks. Revolutionaries will use him to argue for equality and against property. Anthropologists will debate whether any actual humans ever lived this way. Philosophers will argue about whether the state of nature is a useful fiction or a dangerous delusion. But the power of the idea is not in its accuracy. The power is in what it allows Rousseau to say about the present. By inventing a past where humans were free and equal, he makes the present lack of freedom and equality look like a historical crime rather than a natural condition. This move from is to ought through an imagined was becomes the template for revolutionary thought. The fatal moment, how property destroyed paradise. The first person who, having enclosed a piece of land, took it into his head to say, "This is mine," and found people simple enough to believe him, was the true founder of civil society. How many crimes, wars, murders, how many miseries and horrors the human race would have been spared if someone had pulled up the stakes or filled in the ditch and cried out to his fellows, "Beware of listening to this impostor. You are lost if you forget that the fruits of the earth belong to everyone and the earth to no one." This is the most famous passage from Rousseau's Second Discourse. It contains his entire political philosophy in compressed form. Property is the original sin. Everything that follows, all inequality, all oppression, all misery, traces back to this moment when someone claimed exclusive ownership of what should belong to all. Before property, Rousseau argues, there was no inequality worth mentioning. Yes, one person might be stronger or faster, but these natural differences meant nothing. The weaker person could just avoid the stronger. Physical advantages created no permanent inequality because there was nothing to accumulate, no way to translate temporary superiority into structural dominance. Property changes everything. Once land can be owned, natural differences matter. The strong can claim more land. The clever can manipulate others into accepting unfavorable arrangements. Advantages compound. Small initial differences become vast gulfs. The person born to a family with much land has everything. The person born to a family with no land has nothing. Rousseau describes the process with bitter precision. The rich, having accumulated property, need to protect it, but they are few and the poor are many. Violence will not work because the many will overwhelm the few. So the rich need a different strategy. They need to convince the poor that the current arrangement is legitimate, that property rights are natural and just, that laws protecting property protect everyone equally. This is the great fraud at the heart of civilization. The rich propose to the poor, "Let us create laws to protect everyone from violence and theft. Let us establish government to enforce these laws. Let us all agree to respect each other's property. It sounds fair. It sounds like it benefits everyone. The poor, simple and desperate for some stability, agree. But the laws protect property, and property is already unequally distributed. The person with much property gets much protection. The person with no property gets nothing except the obligation to respect others' property. The laws create peace, but it is a peace that freezes existing inequality into place and makes it permanent. Government arises not from a genuine social contract among equals, but from a deception practiced by the rich on the poor. The state is not a neutral arbiter, but an instrument of class domination. Its purpose is to protect the property of the wealthy from the resentment of the poor. Police, courts, laws, prisons, all exist to maintain an illegitimate distribution of resources. Rousseau traces the consequences with escalating darkness. Once property and law exist, new vices emerge. The poor develop envy and resentment. The rich develop contempt and fear. Everyone becomes anxious, comparing themselves to others, measuring their worth in relative terms. Amour de soi, natural self-regard, becomes amour propre, vanity that depends on others' opinions. Dependence becomes universal. The poor depend on the rich for work. The rich depend on the poor for labor. Everyone depends on others' approval for their sense of self-worth. Natural freedom is completely lost. We are all slaves now, slaves to property, to opinion, to the endless need for more. Rousseau's analysis gets stranger and more extreme as it continues. He describes the progression of society through stages, each worse than the last. After property and law come further developments. Luxury, arts, sciences, all the things usually considered marks of civilization's height. But for Rousseau, these are symptoms of advanced decay. In the most developed societies, inequality reaches its ultimate form. The people are enslaved but do not realize it. They think they are free because they can choose their master. But the choice between masters is not freedom. The rich are equally enslaved, trapped in their need for more wealth, more luxury, more distinction. Everyone is miserable, no one is free. The final stage is despotism. When inequality becomes extreme, when the rich have everything and the poor nothing, law collapses into naked power. A tyrant emerges, someone strong or clever enough to seize control. Everyone, rich and poor, becomes subject to the tyrant's arbitrary will. This is the end point of the process that began with property. From that first fence, that first claim of mine, a straight line leads to universal slavery. But Rousseau adds a twist. Under despotism, a new equality emerges. Everyone is equally nothing before the tyrant. The rich lose their property. The poor lose nothing because they had nothing. Everyone is reduced to the same level of subjection. In a perverse way, despotism returns humanity to something like the state of nature. All are equal, though now equal in slavery rather than equal in freedom. This creates the possibility of starting over. Revolution becomes thinkable. If despotism is the end point of corrupted society, then overthrowing the despot means a chance to rebuild. The social contract can be genuinely negotiated, this time among equals who have all lost everything. A legitimate society becomes possible. Rousseau does not advocate revolution in the second discourse. He is describing, not prescribing. But the implications are clear. If society is founded on fraud, if property is theft, if law is domination, then nothing about the existing order is legitimate. Everything can and perhaps should be overthrown. The radical potential in Rousseau's thought is already fully present by 1755, even if he has not yet worked out the positive vision of what should replace corrupted society. Critics attack immediately. Property is natural, they argue. Labor creates property rights. If you clear land and plant crops, surely the harvest is yours. Rousseau's response is, who gave you the land to clear? Nature. Nature gives nothing to individuals. Nature provides for the species. You have no right to exclude others from what nature provides commonly. But what about the labor itself? If you work, surely you deserve the product of your labor. Again, Rousseau complicates the answer. In a state of nature, yes, what you gather or hunt is yours to consume. But property in land is different. Land exists before labor. Claiming exclusive ownership of land means claiming the right to exclude others from what they need for survival. This is not a right, but a theft. The debate about property rights and natural rights will continue for centuries. Rousseau does not win the argument in any simple sense, but he succeeds in making property problematic, in forcing its defenders to actually defend it rather than assume it is natural and obvious. He makes inequality visible as inequality rather than as the natural order. The second discourse's analysis of property has consequences Rousseau does not fully control. Later revolutionaries will read it and conclude that property must be abolished. Socialists and communists will claim Rousseau as an ancestor. Rousseau himself never advocates abolishing property completely. He recognizes that returning to the state of nature is impossible. Civilization cannot be undone. We cannot forget language, unlearn agriculture, return to isolated wandering. The question becomes, given that we are civilized and cannot stop being civilized, what is the least bad form civilization can take? Can we create a society that preserves some measure of freedom and equality while accepting that we cannot have the perfect freedom and equality of natural man? This is the question the social contract will attempt to answer. For now, the second discourse ends in pessimism. We were happy and are now miserable. We were free and are now slaves. We were equal and are now divided into masters and servants. The cause is property. The mechanism is deception. The result is universal unhappiness. If this were all Rousseau wrote, he would be remembered as a brilliant diagnostician of social ills, but not as a dangerous revolutionary thinker. The danger comes from what he writes next. Having explained how we became corrupted, he will attempt to explain how we might become legitimate. Having torn down the existing order, he will try to build something new. And in that attempt to imagine a legitimate society, he will create ideas more dangerous than anything in his critique. The road from the state of nature leads to the social contract, and from the social contract to the guillotine. But that comes later. First, life intervenes. The Hermit Philosopher, Isolation and Paranoia begin. April 1756. Rousseau leaves Paris. He is 43 years old, famous, and increasingly uncomfortable with fame. Madame d'Épinay, a wealthy patron, offers him a cottage on her estate at Montmorency, just outside Paris. The cottage is called the Hermitage. Rousseau accepts. He will live there with Thérèse Levasseur, her mother, and his own growing need for solitude. The Hermitage is small, simple, surrounded by forest. It is exactly what Rousseau claims to want. Here he can live according to his principles, away from the corruption of Parisian salons, close to nature. He will write, walk in the woods, copy music for money, and avoid the social obligations that exhaust him. It should be perfect. It is not perfect. Almost immediately, Rousseau begins to feel isolated, not in the peaceful way he imagined, but in a paranoid way. He is too far from Paris to see friends easily, but close enough to feel excluded when not invited to things. He hears about gatherings at Madame d'Épinay's main house and wonders why he was not invited. He suspects people are talking about him. He starts to see slights where none exist. The philosophe circle in Paris is increasingly uncomfortable with Rousseau anyway. His critique of civilization makes him awkward company for people trying to reform civilization through reason and progress. Diderot, Grimm, D'Alembert, Voltaire, they all believe in enlightenment, in the power of knowledge and science to improve human life. Rousseau has publicly argued that knowledge and science corrupt humanity. The tension is inevitable. In December 1757, D'Alembert publishes an article on Geneva in the Encyclopédie. In it, he suggests that Geneva, culturally austere and Calvinist, should allow a theater. This seems innocuous. Most educated people agree that theater is civilizing and good. Rousseau disagrees violently. He writes a lengthy response, Letter to D'Alembert on the Theater. The letter argues that theater is morally corrupting. Actors pretend to be what they are not, teaching dishonesty. Audiences learn to value appearance over reality. Plays depict vice attractively, making it seem appealing. Worst of all, theater makes people passive spectators of life rather than active participants. Geneva should reject theater and preserve its austere, participatory civic culture. The philosophes are baffled and annoyed. It is one thing to critique civilization in abstract philosophical terms. It is another to attack theater, one of the glories of French culture. Voltaire, who writes plays, is particularly offended. The split between Rousseau and the Enlightenment establishment widens. Rousseau is increasingly alone. At the Hermitage, Rousseau's emotional life becomes complicated. He falls in love, or something like love, with Sophie d'Houdetot, the sister-in-law of Madame d'Épinay. Sophie visits the Hermitage frequently. She is lively, intelligent, and unavailable, already having both a husband and a lover. Rousseau's infatuation is intense, obsessive, and largely unrequited. He takes long walks with her. He writes her letters. He makes himself ridiculous. Thérèse watches this with whatever feelings she has. She is barely literate, so she leaves no record of her perspective, but she is there, in the Hermitage, watching Rousseau obsess over another woman. The strangeness of their relationship becomes more apparent. They live together, they have had children together whom Rousseau abandoned, but Rousseau does not really seem to regard her as an equal partner. She is more servant than companion, more caretaker than wife. The situation with Sophie d'Houdetot escalates absurdly. Grimm, Rousseau's friend, is actually Sophie's lover. This creates a tangled situation. Rousseau living on property belonging to Madame d'Épinay, in love with Sophie d'Houdetot, who is the lover of Grimm, who is friends with both Rousseau and Madame d'Épinay. When this social circle discovers Rousseau's infatuation, it becomes gossip and source of tension. Rousseau handles it badly. He is defensive, hypersensitive, convinced everyone is conspiring against him. He quarrels with Madame d'Épinay over trivial matters. She asks him to accompany her to Geneva for health reasons. He refuses, claiming he is too ill to travel, but then clearly spending his time walking in the woods and visiting Sophie. The hypocrisy is obvious. In December 1757, Madame d'Épinay asks Rousseau to leave the Hermitage. The stated reason is that she needs the cottage for someone else. The real reason is that he has made himself impossible, ungrateful, paranoid, difficult. Rousseau leaves and moves to a different cottage nearby at Montlouis. He has alienated his patron and most of his friends within less than 2 years of seeking solitude. The break with Diderot comes around the same time. The exact causes are disputed, but Rousseau becomes convinced that Diderot has betrayed him, revealed confidences, turned others against him. In reality, Diderot is mostly just exhausted by Rousseau's sensitivity and bizarre behavior. Diderot writes to Rousseau trying to repair the friendship. Rousseau responds with accusations and recriminations. The friendship ends. Grimm takes Madame d'Épinay's side in the dispute. Another friendship ends. Rousseau is systematically destroying all his relationships with the philosophe. By early 1758, he is isolated from the intellectual circle that made him famous. He blames them. They conspired against him, he believes. They resented his success. They hated his honesty. It does not occur to him that his own behavior might be the problem. At Montlouis, Rousseau continues working. He is writing a novel, Julie or the New Eloise, which will become his most popular work. He is also thinking about political philosophy, about what makes government legitimate. These thoughts will become the social contract, and he is planning a comprehensive work on education, which will become Émile. But his mental state is deteriorating. The paranoia that started as sensitivity to criticism is becoming systematic. He starts to see patterns. Everyone who wrongs him seems connected to everyone else. It is not just that individual people dislike him. It is that there is a conspiracy. The philosophes are coordinating their attacks. They are plotting to destroy his reputation. They are spreading lies about him. In reality, most of the philosophes are just moving on with their lives. They are tired of Rousseau's drama, but Rousseau interprets their indifference as malice, their silence as conspiracy. He is entering a psychological state that will dominate the rest of his life. The certainty that he is persecuted, that powerful forces are arrayed against him, that he alone sees the truth and everyone else is either deceived or in on the plot. The irony is profound. Rousseau, who diagnosed humanity's sickness as dependence on others' opinions, is himself desperately dependent on others' opinions. He cares intensely what people think of him. Every criticism wounds him. Every perceived slight becomes evidence of conspiracy. The philosopher of natural independence is unnaturally dependent on validation. Another irony, Rousseau preaches solitude and retreat from society, but when actually living in solitude, he is miserable. He needs people even as he pushes them away. He wants to be admired even as he attacks the desire for admiration. His life and his philosophy are at war with each other, and he cannot see it or will not admit it. The Hermitage period ends in bitterness and alienation. Rousseau has separated himself from the social world of Parisian intellectuals. He lives near a village, close enough to nature to satisfy his principles but not actually in wilderness. He has Thérèse, though their relationship is more practical than passionate. He has his writing, he has his walks, and he has his growing conviction that the world is against him. This period establishes a pattern that will repeat. Rousseau will find patrons, accept their help, then quarrel with them and leave in anger, convinced they wronged him. He will make friends, then decide they have betrayed him. He will settle somewhere, then become convinced that the locals are persecuting him and he must flee. Each time, the cycle reinforces his sense that he is uniquely persecuted, that he is too honest and good for a corrupt world. But from this paranoia and isolation come his greatest works. Julie is written in emotional intensity bordering on madness. The social contract emerges from thinking about how legitimate society is even possible when all actual societies are corrupt. Émile comes from imagining how to raise a child uncorrupted by the world that Rousseau himself finds unbearable. His personal collapse and his philosophical achievement happen simultaneously. The question is whether one causes the other, and if so, which direction the causation runs. Love, betrayal, and Thérèse, the personal chaos. Thérèse Levasseur enters Rousseau's life in 1745. She is 23, he is 33. She works as a laundress at the hotel where Rousseau lives. She is barely literate. She cannot tell time. She can barely do basic arithmetic. By Rousseau's own account, she is simple, uncultivated, ignorant of philosophy and literature and everything that matters to the intellectual world he inhabits. She is perfect for him. With Thérèse, Rousseau does not have to perform. He does not have to be brilliant or witty or impress anyone. She accepts him without judging him against other philosophes. She takes care of practical matters he finds difficult. She asks nothing of him intellectually. Their relationship is utterly unequal and apparently for Rousseau comfortable in its inequality. They begin living together. Not married, which Rousseau will claim is because he objects to the institution of marriage as corrupting and unnecessary. More likely, he does not want to be tied down formally, and Thérèse has no power to demand formal recognition. She is his companion, housekeeper, and sexual partner in whatever proportions suit him. Thérèse becomes pregnant. This happens in 1746, roughly a year after they meet. When the baby is born, Rousseau takes the infant to the foundling hospital, the Enfant Trouve, and leaves it there anonymously. He does not record the child's name. He does not arrange for any follow-up. The child disappears into the institutional system where most foundlings die. Thérèse becomes pregnant again, and again, and again, and again, 5 times in total. Each time Rousseau takes the newborn to the foundling hospital, 5 children abandoned. All 5 almost certainly died. The mortality rate at the Enfant Trouve was roughly 80% in the first year. Rousseau would have known this. Everyone knew this. Leaving a child there was effectively a death sentence. Later, much later, when this becomes public knowledge, Rousseau will offer justifications. He could not afford to raise children. His financial situation was precarious. Children would have distracted him from his work. Thérèse's family, who lived with them, were terrible people and would have corrupted the children. The foundling hospital would educate the children better than he could. The children would be raised as workers and craftsmen, which is a good life, better than being raised as philosophes' children. None of this holds up to even minimal scrutiny. Rousseau had friends who would have helped support children. Many far poorer families raised children. His work was important, but was it more important than his children's lives? Thérèse's family could have been avoided. The foundling hospital was known to be a death trap, not an educational institution. And if working class life is so good, why did Rousseau become a philosopher instead of remaining a watchmaker? The real reason is simpler and darker. Rousseau did not want children. They would have been inconvenient. They would have tied him down. They would have required sacrifices. So he got rid of them. 5 times he chose his own convenience over his children's survival. He killed them, effectively, through abandonment. The hypocrisy becomes unbearable when we remember that Rousseau writes Émile, a book about the proper education of children. He writes hundreds of pages about how children should be raised, what care they require, what mistakes parents make, all while having abandoned 5 of his own children to die. The book that makes him famous as an education theorist is written by someone who refused to educate or even allow to live his own children. Therese's role in this is unclear. She apparently agreed to the abandonments, or at least did not stop them. But what power did she have? She was dependent on Rousseau financially. She was uneducated, probably intimidated by his intellectual authority. When he said, "This is what must be done," what could she say? We have no record of her feelings about this. She could not write them down. Rousseau does not record them. She is silent in the historical record, as poor illiterate women usually are. Years later, after Rousseau becomes famous and then infamous, the abandoned children become a scandal. His enemies find out and publicize it. Voltaire, who despises Rousseau, makes sure everyone knows. The man who writes about education abandoned his children. The philosopher of natural virtue let his children die. The critic of civilization's corruption committed one of civilization's most corrupt acts. Rousseau writes about this in his Confessions. He is defensive, but also strangely honest. He admits what he did. He admits it was wrong by conventional standards. But he insists his motives were not evil. He was overwhelmed. He made mistakes. He would do things differently if he could go back. The tone is self-pitying rather than genuinely remorseful. He seems more concerned with how the abandonment makes him look than with the children themselves. In 1768, after decades together, Rousseau finally marries Thérèse. He is 56, she is 46. Why now? Partly to protect her legally. If he dies, she will have some rights as his widow. But also because by 1768, Rousseau is paranoid and isolated, and Thérèse is one of the few people still loyal to him. The marriage is pragmatic, not romantic. Their relationship through all these years is strange. Rousseau sometimes speaks of her fondly as a simple good woman who asks little of him. Other times he complains about her ignorance, her family's greed, her incomprehension of his work. He keeps her with him everywhere he goes in his years of fleeing across Europe, but he does not seem to regard her as an intellectual equal or even as a real companion. She is there, she is useful, she is loyal. That seems to be enough. Thérèse outlives him. After his death in 1778, she becomes a minor celebrity as the widow of the famous philosopher. She tells stories about him to visitors. Some of the stories contradict things Rousseau wrote about himself. She claims he was impotent for much of their relationship. She claims other men fathered some of the abandoned children. She claims he treated her badly, that she stayed out of necessity, not choice. How much of this is true? We cannot know. Thérèse's testimony comes late, after Rousseau cannot respond. She may be settling scores. She may be distorting things. Or she may be finally telling her version of a relationship where only his version was ever recorded. The truth is probably that their relationship was loveless, convenient, unequal, and sustained by mutual dependence rather than affection. The personal chaos in Rousseau's life is not limited to Thérèse. There is the obsessive, unrequited infatuation with Sophie Dudetot, which makes him absurd and costs him friendships. There are the endless quarrels with patrons who help him. There are the breaks with friends who never quite understand what they did wrong. Every relationship in Rousseau's life eventually ends in bitterness and accusations of betrayal. This pattern reveals something about the man. He is incapable of maintaining equal adult relationships. With Thérèse, he is dominant and she is subordinate. With patrons, he is dependent and they are superior, which he resents until he lashes out. With intellectual equals like Diderot or Hume, he is competitive and sensitive, seeing slights everywhere, unable to accept criticism or disagreement. The philosopher who writes about natural human goodness and social corruption is himself difficult, self-absorbed, paranoid, and cruel. The man who imagines humans in the state of nature as peaceful and content is in his actual life anxious and perpetually at war with others. The gap between the philosophy and the life could hardly be wider. Some argue that Rousseau's personal failures do not invalidate his ideas. The philosophy can be judged separately from the philosopher. This is partly true, but it is also relevant that the man who diagnosed humanity's sickness was himself deeply sick, that the doctor prescribing the cure was himself dying of the disease. It raises the question, does the philosophy come from insight or from pathology? Is Rousseau describing human nature or projecting his own nature onto humanity? Consider his central claims. Humans are naturally good but corrupted by society. Humans are naturally free but enslaved by civilization. Humans are naturally equal but divided by property. Now consider his life. He feels himself to be good but sees society as judging him harshly. He feels himself to be free but is constantly dependent on and in conflict with others. He feels himself to be equal to other intellectuals but is constantly comparing himself and coming up with grievances. Perhaps Rousseau is not describing humanity in general. Perhaps he is describing himself and universalizing his own psychological condition. He is naturally good, he believes, but society misunderstands and persecutes him. He wants to be free but keeps needing others and resenting that need. He believes he is equal to the great philosophe, but is treated as inferior, which he experiences as injustice rather than accurate assessment. If this is right, then Rousseau's philosophy is autobiography disguised as anthropology. The state of nature is what Rousseau wishes he could be: alone, free, simple, content. Civil society is what Rousseau experiences himself to be trapped in: dependent, compared, judged, corrupted. The whole system is a personal fantasy and nightmare projected onto human history. This does not make the philosophy worthless. Even if Rousseau is describing himself, he describes himself powerfully, and perhaps many people share his feelings. The sense of being corrupted by social demands, of losing authenticity in playing roles for others, of being enslaved by the need for esteem. These are common human experiences, not just Rousseau's peculiarities, but it does suggest caution. If the philosophy comes from personal pathology, then applying it to politics may import the pathology into political life. Rousseau's paranoia, his inability to sustain relationships, his conviction that he is uniquely persecuted, these are features of his thought as much as his insights. A political philosophy built on his worldview may inherit both the insights and the pathologies. The question becomes, can we separate the valuable parts of Rousseau's thought from the dangerous parts? Can we take his critique of inequality and love of freedom without absorbing his paranoia and authoritarianism? Or is the package indivisible, the vision inseparable from the darkness? Émile, Reinventing Education, May 1762. Émile, or On Education, is published in Paris and Amsterdam simultaneously. It is Rousseau's longest work, a detailed account of how to raise a boy from infancy to adulthood without corruption by society. It is part novel, part educational treatise, part philosophical argument. It will revolutionize thinking about childhood and education. It will also get Rousseau exiled and nearly arrested. The premise is simple. Take a boy, raise him according to nature rather than according to social convention, and he will develop into a free, good, complete human being. Education has gone wrong because it tries to make children into miniature adults, stuffing their heads with information they cannot understand, forcing them into social roles before they are ready. Natural education follows the child's development, providing experiences appropriate to each stage. Émile, the imaginary student, is an orphan. This is crucial. Rousseau needs complete control over the boy's education without interference from family or society. The tutor, presumably Rousseau himself, will be the only influence. This is already a fantasy. Real education happens in families, communities, institutions. But Rousseau needs isolation to demonstrate his method. Infancy. Rousseau argues against swaddling, the practice of wrapping babies tightly. Let babies move freely. They need to develop their bodies naturally. He argues for breastfeeding by mothers rather than hiring wet nurses. Natural is always better than artificial. He argues against hurrying development. Babies should not be forced to walk or talk before they are ready. Much of this is sensible and was radical at the time. Rousseau is arguing against aristocratic practices where children were handed off to servants and shaped into miniature adults as quickly as possible. His emphasis on following natural development, on physical freedom, on maternal care, influences later education reform in positive directions. Childhood, roughly ages 2 to 12. The key principle is negative education. Do not teach Émile anything. Instead, prevent him from learning bad things. Keep him away from books, from society, from moral instruction. Let him learn through experience. If he breaks a window, let him sleep in a cold room until he understands why windows matter. If he ruins his toy, do not replace it. He learns through natural consequences, not through lectures. Émile lives in the countryside, far from cities. He runs, climbs, swims. He develops his body and senses. He learns practical skills like carpentry and agriculture. He does not learn to read until he wants to, which Rousseau imagines happening around age 12. Reading comes from curiosity, not compulsion. This sounds idyllic, but notice what it requires. Total control by the tutor, complete isolation from other children and adults, a carefully managed environment where all consequences are natural but somehow none are dangerous. It is not education but theater, where the tutor sets up situations pretending to be natural while actually controlling everything. Adolescence, roughly 12 to 15. Now Émile learns useful knowledge, geography by traveling, science by observation and experiment, history, but only to learn about humanity, not dates and kings. No religious instruction yet. Religion comes later when reason is developed enough to handle it. The goal is to make Émile independent in judgment, able to think for himself, not parroting what authorities tell him. This part of Émile is least controversial. Teaching through experience, emphasizing understanding over memorization, developing judgment rather than obedience, these are now standard principles of progressive education. Rousseau did not invent them all, but he synthesized and popularized them. Every modern educator who emphasizes hands-on learning, critical thinking, and child-centered pedagogy is descended from Rousseau. Late adolescence to early adulthood, 15 to 20. Now comes moral and religious education. Émile learns about society, but only after his character is formed. He reads history to see how societies become corrupt. He learns about inequality, about power, about the dangers of dependence. He is being prepared to enter society without being corrupted by it. This is where Rousseau inserts the profession of faith of the Savoyard vicar, a long section that is really a separate essay. A priest tells Émile about religion. The vicar rejects Orthodox Christianity and proposes natural religion based on reason and conscience. God exists and can be known through nature. The soul is immortal. Virtue consists in following conscience. Everything else, all dogma and ceremony and institutional religion, is human invention and probably corrupt. This section will get Rousseau in enormous trouble. Both Catholic and Protestant authorities see it as heretical. The vicar doubts miracles, rejects revelation, questions the Bible's divine inspiration. He sounds more like a deist than a Christian. The Sorbonne condemns the book. The Archbishop of Paris denounces it. The Parliament of Paris orders it burned and Rousseau arrested. But before the crisis hits, there is the final section, Sophie. Émile is now ready for marriage. Rousseau must describe female education so Émile can meet an appropriate partner. Sophie is educated completely differently from Émile. Where Émile learns independence, Sophie learns pleasing others. Where Émile develops reason, Sophie develops intuition and charm. Where Émile becomes autonomous, Sophie learns dependence. Rousseau's argument: men and women are fundamentally different natures, so they need different educations. Women are made for modesty, domesticity, pleasing men. Women's reason is practical, not abstract. Women should not be educated in sciences or philosophy. They should learn skills for managing households and raising children. Sophie must be Émile's helper, not his equal. This part of Émile becomes a foundational text for arguments against women's education and equality. Every 19th century opponent of women's rights quotes Rousseau on natural differences and separate spheres. The man who argues for natural equality in his political works argues for natural inequality in his educational work. The contradiction seems not to bother him. Men are naturally equal to each other. Women are naturally subordinate to men. Both claims, he insists, come from nature. Émile and Sophie meet, fall in love, marry, but Rousseau adds a strange coda, published separately as Émile and Sophie or the Solitaries. In it, the marriage fails. Sophie is unfaithful. Émile leaves her and wanders the world in misery. The perfect education produces a man who cannot handle the corruption of society after all. The happy ending is revealed as delusion. This unfinished sequel is deeply pessimistic, suggesting Rousseau doubts his own program. The influence of Émile is immense and contradictory. Progressive educators embrace the child-centered approach, the emphasis on development stages, the critique of rote learning. The French Revolution embraces the idea that education can create new citizens for a new society. Romantics embrace the elevation of childhood as a special pure state. Conservatives embrace the rigid gender roles and the sanctity of maternal domestic duties. The book's central problem is that it cannot possibly work in practice. Real children have parents. They live in societies. They cannot be isolated for 20 years while a tutor stages naturalistic learning experiences. The whole edifice rests on conditions that cannot exist. Rousseau knows this and admits it. Émile is an ideal, an imaginary demonstration of principles, not a practical manual. But this creates a dangerous pattern. Rousseau describes an impossible ideal, admits it is impossible, but then uses it to judge all actual education as corrupt and wrong. Since no real education can match the ideal, all real education is failure. This is not just critique, but nihilism. It denies the possibility of good enough education, insisting on perfection or nothing. The same pattern appears in Rousseau's political thought. Describe an ideal society based on the general will. Admit no actual society meets the standard. Use the ideal to condemn all actual societies. The result is revolutionary temperament. Nothing existing is legitimate. Everything must be destroyed and rebuilt. Half measures are worse than nothing because they perpetuate illusions. Émile also reveals Rousseau's totalitarianism in miniature. The tutor controls everything about Émile's life while pretending to let nature operate. The boy thinks he is free, learning through his own choices. Actually, the tutor manipulates every situation. Freedom is obedience to the tutor's plan. The boy is free only to do what the tutor wants him to want to do. This is exactly the logic of forcing people to be free that appears in the social contract. After Émile is condemned and burned, people ask why Rousseau published it if it was going to cause such trouble. He claims he did not expect the reaction, that he thought the religious sections were orthodox enough to pass. This seems disingenuous. Rousseau knew he was challenging religious authority. Perhaps he wanted martyrdom. Perhaps persecution confirmed his sense of being persecuted for truth-telling. Perhaps he needed enemies to feel alive. What is certain is that Émile, combined with The Social Contract published the same month, makes Rousseau too dangerous to tolerate. He is no longer just an eccentric philosopher criticizing arts and sciences. He is attacking the foundations of church and state. He must flee. The Social Contract, man is born free. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. One believes himself the master of others, and yet he is a greater slave than they. How did this transformation come about? I do not know. What can make it legitimate? I believe I can answer this question. These are the opening words of The Social Contract, published in April 1762, the same month as Émile. They are among the most famous sentences in political philosophy. They contain everything: the problem, the mystery, the project. We were free, now we are enslaved. We think we are masters, but we are slaves. Something went wrong. How can it be fixed? Notice what Rousseau does not ask. He does not ask whether chains can be broken and natural freedom restored. He knows that is impossible. We cannot return to the state of nature. Civilization cannot be undone. We are social beings now, dependent on each other, trapped in relationships of domination and submission. The question is not how to escape society, but how to make society legitimate. Legitimacy is the key concept. Most governments exist through force or fraud. The powerful impose their will on the weak, or they trick the weak into accepting arrangements that benefit the powerful. These governments may be stable, may endure for centuries, but they are not legitimate. Might does not make right. Habit does not create obligation. Just because something exists does not mean it should exist. What would make government legitimate? What would transform mere force into genuine authority, mere habitual obedience into real obligation? Rousseau's answer: only a genuine social contract, freely entered into by equals, where everyone surrenders the same things and receives the same benefits. Not the fraudulent contract imposed by the rich on the poor, but a real contract creating a genuine community. Here is how it works. Everyone gives up their natural freedom completely. Everyone surrenders all their rights to the community as a whole. This sounds like total slavery, but Rousseau claims it is actually perfect freedom. Why? Because you are surrendering to yourself. The community is you and everyone else together. When you obey the community, you are obeying yourself. You are both sovereign and subject, ruler and ruled, legislator and citizen. This is the fundamental move in Rousseau's political philosophy, and it is either brilliant or monstrous depending on how you look at it. By making the individual and the collective identical, Rousseau claims to solve the problem of political obligation. You are not obeying someone else, you are obeying yourself. Therefore, you remain free even while being governed. The community that results from the social contract is not just a collection of individuals. It is a new entity with its own will, the general will. This is not the same as the will of all. The will of all is just the sum of individual private interests. The general will is something else, something higher. It is what everyone would want if they were thinking about the good of the community rather than their own private advantage. How do you discover the general will? Rousseau is maddeningly vague on this crucial point. Sometimes he suggests it emerges from democratic voting, but only if citizens vote correctly, thinking about the common good rather than private interest. Other times he suggests the general will is what a wise legislator would decree. Other times it seems almost mystical, a kind of collective consciousness that transcends individual minds. What is clear is that the general will is always right. It cannot be wrong. Why? Because it aims at the common good by definition. Whatever aims at the common good is the general will. Therefore, the general will always aims at the common good. This is circular reasoning, but Rousseau seems not to notice or care. Here is where things get dangerous. What happens when an individual disagrees with the general will? What if a citizen thinks the community is wrong about something? Rousseau has an answer. The citizen is mistaken. The general will is always right, so disagreement with it means the individual has confused their private interest with the common good. The community must correct this error. And if the individual still refuses to obey, then, Rousseau writes, they must be forced to be free. This phrase, forced to be free, is perhaps the most notorious in all political philosophy. How can forcing someone be making them free? Rousseau's answer: true freedom is obeying the general will, which is your own will properly understood. When you disobey, you are enslaved to your passions and private interests. Forcing you to obey liberates you from this slavery. Compulsion is freedom. Obedience is autonomy. The totalitarian implications are obvious. Any government can claim to represent the general will. Any policy can be justified as the common good. Any dissent can be dismissed as private interest or error. Citizens who resist can be forced to comply for their own good, for their freedom. The road from this logic to the guillotine is short and straight. Rousseau adds more disturbing details. The social contract requires complete surrender of all rights to the community. You keep nothing back. There is no private sphere protected from the general will. If the community decides your property is needed, it can take it. If the community decides your religion is dangerous, it can forbid it. If the community decides you must die for the common good, you must die. This is not tyranny, Rousseau insists, because you consented. You entered the social contract freely. You surrendered your rights voluntarily. Therefore, everything that follows is legitimate. But when did this consent happen? Rousseau is vague. Sometimes he treats the social contract as a historical event. Other times as an implicit agreement made by living in society. Other times as a hypothetical. This is what rational people would agree to if they were founding a society. The problem is that no actual person has ever consented to Rousseau's social contract. It is imaginary, like Émile. And like Émile, it serves not as a description of reality, but as a standard for judging reality. Every actual government fails to match the ideal. Therefore, every actual government is illegitimate. Revolution is always justified because no existing order has genuine authority. Rousseau tries to specify what a legitimate society would look like. It must be small. Large nations cannot have genuine general wills because citizens are too distant from each other. It must be relatively equal economically. Great inequality makes the general will impossible because rich and poor have opposed interests. It must have simple morals and austere culture. Luxury and arts corrupt civic virtue. This sounds like ancient Sparta, which Rousseau admires, or like Geneva as he imagines it. Small city-states where citizens know each other, meet regularly to vote, share common values, and subordinate private interests to community good. Modern nation-states are too large, too complex, too diverse. They cannot be legitimate. Representative democracy is not real democracy because representatives have their own interests. Only direct democracy, where citizens vote on laws themselves, can be legitimate. But even this is not enough. Citizens must have the right values, the right education, the right religion. Rousseau proposes a civil religion mandatory for all citizens. It must teach that God exists, that the soul is immortal, that virtue is rewarded and vice punished, that the social contract is sacred. Anyone who refuses to accept this civil religion must be banished. Anyone who accepts it but then acts against it must be executed for lying. Rousseau presents this as tolerance. He is not requiring belief in any particular revelation or dogma. The civil religion is minimal, just what is necessary for social cohesion. But it is still compulsory belief enforced by death. The philosopher who criticized religious intolerance is proposing his own form of it. The difference is that his intolerance serves the general will, so it is legitimate. Throughout the social contract, Rousseau acknowledges problems with his system. The general will may be right, but citizens may not perceive it correctly. Direct democracy may be ideal, but it requires conditions that rarely exist. The sovereign people may make bad laws. His response is always to call for a legislator, a wise founder who can shape the people properly, give them good laws, educate them in virtue. This legislator is not part of the social contract. The legislator comes before, establishes the conditions for legitimate society, then steps aside. Rousseau cites Moses, Lycurgus, Numa as examples. These are mythical or legendary figures, not models any actual politician can follow. But revolutionaries will read this and decide they are the legislators, that they must shape the people into proper citizens, using force if necessary. The social contract is short, abstract, often contradictory. It was not immediately influential. The first printing sold poorly. Most philosophes ignored it, but it is a time bomb. 27 years after publication, the French Revolution begins. Revolutionaries discover Rousseau. They find in the social contract a justification for everything they want to do. Destroy the old order, remake society according to reason, force citizens to be virtuous, execute those who resist. Robespierre carries a copy of the social contract with him. He quotes it constantly. The general will becomes the revolution. Disagreement becomes treason. Private interest becomes crime. The terror is applied Rousseauian philosophy. Forcing people to be free means the guillotine for anyone insufficiently enthusiastic about the common good. Did Rousseau intend this? Of course not. He imagined small, peaceful republics, not revolutionary violence. But intention is not the question. The question is what the ideas enable. And Rousseau's ideas enable totalitarianism. They provide the logic, the vocabulary, the justification. Every element is there. The mystical general will, the identity of freedom and obedience, the legitimacy of forcing dissenters, the subordination of individual to collective, the need for civil religion, the role of the wise legislator who shapes the people. Defenders of Rousseau argue that he has been misinterpreted, that properly understood his philosophy supports freedom and equality, not tyranny. This is partly true. Rousseau genuinely values freedom and equality. He wants legitimate government based on consent. He opposes arbitrary power, but he also creates concepts that, once unleashed, cannot be controlled. The general will, forcing people to be free, the total surrender of rights. These are dangerous ideas regardless of what Rousseau intended. The deeper problem is that Rousseau tries to solve an impossible problem: how to have both perfect freedom and perfect order, both individual autonomy and collective unity. His solution is to declare them identical. Freedom is obedience to the general will. Autonomy is subordination to the community. This is not a solution, but a verbal trick. It makes the problem disappear by redefining the terms. In reality, there is always tension between individual and community, freedom and order, private and public. Liberal political philosophy accepts this tension and tries to manage it through limited government, individual rights, checks, and balances. Rousseau rejects all of this as illegitimate half measures. He wants complete solution, perfect synthesis. The result is not synthesis but domination. The collective completely absorbs the individual in the name of freedom. The social contract ends by acknowledging that no actual government meets its standards. Every existing state is illegitimate. Rousseau offers no practical path forward. He has described an ideal that cannot be realized and used it to condemn all reality. This is not political philosophy in the sense of guiding action. It is utopian fantasy used as a weapon of total critique. But total critique has consequences. If nothing is legitimate, everything can be destroyed. If the existing order has no authority, any violence against it is justified. If we must create perfect freedom, any means are acceptable. Rousseau does not advocate violence, but his philosophy removes all barriers against it. He delegitimizes the present without providing realistic alternatives, leaving only revolutionary impulse. In June 1762, both The Social Contract and Émile are condemned in Paris. The books are burned, arrest warrants are issued. Rousseau must flee. He is 50 years old, in poor health, paranoid. He will spend the next several years running across Europe, convinced everyone is conspiring against him, unable to settle anywhere. The prophet of legitimate society cannot find a place in any actual society. The man who designed perfect government cannot live under any real government. Burned books and arrest warrants, Europe turns against him. June 9th, 1762, the Parliament of Paris orders Émile seized and burned. The executioner builds a fire in front of the Palace of Justice. Copies of the book are thrown into the flames. The Parliament issues a warrant for Rousseau's arrest. If caught, he will be imprisoned, possibly for years. Why such a strong reaction? The religious sections of Émile, particularly the profession of faith of the Savoyard vicar, have outraged both Catholic and Protestant authorities. The vicar doubts miracles, questions revelation, treats the Bible as human document rather than divine word. He proposes natural religion based on reason and conscience, making institutional religion optional at best, fraudulent at worst. The Sorbonne, the theological faculty of the University of Paris, formally condemns the book. The Archbishop of Paris issues a pastoral letter denouncing Rousseau's heresies. The book is not just wrong, but dangerous, corrupting youth, undermining faith, attacking the foundations of Christian society. Rousseau is described as a dangerous madman spreading poison. Rousseau is at Montmorency when he learns of the warrant. Friends warn him to flee. He hesitates. Part of him wants to stay and face trial, to defend his ideas publicly, to become a martyr for truth. But wiser heads prevail. A trial would not be a philosophical debate. It would be a condemnation. He would be convicted and imprisoned. He must leave France. On June 9th, the same day as the burning, Rousseau flees. He travels northeast toward the Swiss border. He is terrified, convinced he will be captured at any moment. He travels at night, avoiding main roads, convinced spies are everywhere. The paranoia that has been building for years intensifies. He is not just fleeing authorities, but conspirators he imagines around every corner. He reaches Switzerland on June 14th. He thinks he will be safe here. Switzerland is Protestant, less controlled by Catholic authorities. Geneva is his birthplace. He still technically has citizenship there. But he is wrong. Switzerland will be no refuge. Geneva condemns Émile even more harshly than Paris. On June 19th, the Small Council of Geneva orders the book burned. Both Émile and the Social Contract are condemned together. This is worse than Paris. The city of Calvin, Rousseau's birthplace, rejects him. The republic he praised in his writings turns against him. The Genevan condemnation focuses on politics as much as religion. The Social Contract, with its ideas about popular sovereignty and the general will, threatens established order. The oligarchy that runs Geneva does not want citizens reading about how government should be based on the general will of the people. That is dangerous, revolutionary, destabilizing. Rousseau is devastated. Being condemned by France is one thing. France is Catholic, monarchical, censorious, but Geneva is Protestant, Republican, supposedly committed to freedom of conscience. If Geneva rejects him, where can he go? The small city he idealized has declared him unwelcome. He settles temporarily in Yverdon, in the territory of Béarn. He writes letters defending himself. He publishes a response to the Archbishop of Paris's pastoral letter. He argues that he has been misunderstood, that his religious views are sincere and moral, that his only crime is honesty. But his defenses convince no one in authority. The city of Béarn receives pressure to expel Rousseau. Both French and Genevan authorities want him gone from Switzerland entirely. Béarn hesitates. Rousseau is famous. Expelling him might cause international embarrassment, but keeping him might cause diplomatic problems. In July, Béarn asks Rousseau to leave Yverdon. He moves to Moutier in the Principality of Neuchâtel. This territory is technically independent but under Prussian protection. Frederick the Great of Prussia, an enlightened despot who corresponds with philosophers, does not object to Rousseau's presence. Rousseau settles into a house with Thérèse, hoping for some stability. For a while, Moutier seems safe. Rousseau rents a small house. He continues writing. He works on an autobiographical project that will become the Confessions. He walks in the mountains, he collects plants, he corresponds with admirers across Europe who support him against religious persecution. He begins to hope he can live out his life here quietly. But he cannot stay quiet. He publishes more defenses of his work. He attacks his critics. He writes a response to the Genevan condemnation called Letters Written from the Mountain. In it, he argues that Geneva has betrayed its own republican principles, that its government is illegitimate, that citizens should resist. This is too much. He is not just defending himself, but attacking Geneva's political system. Geneva is furious. Letters Written from the Mountain is burned there. Rousseau is denounced as a traitor to his fatherland. His citizenship, tenuous anyway since he had converted to Catholicism years earlier, is effectively revoked. The city that gave him birth rejects him completely. In Moutier, the local population turns against him. The pastor preaches against him. Rumors spread that Rousseau is an atheist, a sorcerer, a danger to public morals. In September 1765, someone throws stones through his windows at night. This is not legal persecution, but mob violence. Rousseau is terrified. He becomes convinced the entire village wants to kill him. He flees again, this time to the island of Saint-Pierre in the middle of Lake Biel. The island is beautiful, isolated, peaceful. Rousseau spends 6 weeks there, perhaps the last peaceful weeks of his life. He walks, studies plants, rows a boat on the lake. He writes about these weeks later as a kind of paradise, temporary escape from persecution. But even the island is not safe. The Bernese authorities order him to leave. He has caused too much controversy. He must go. By October 1765, Rousseau has been expelled from France, condemned by Geneva, forced out of multiple Swiss territories. He is running out of places to run. David Hume, the Scottish philosopher, offers help. Hume is living in Paris, working at the British Embassy. He admires Rousseau's writing and feels sympathy for his persecution. Hume offers to help Rousseau settle in England, where religious tolerance is greater and French and Swiss authorities have no power. Rousseau accepts. He has nowhere else to go. December 1765. Rousseau and Thérèse travel to Paris, planning to continue to England. They stay briefly with friends. Paris is dangerous for Rousseau because of the arrest warrant, but authorities seem willing to overlook his presence temporarily if he moves on quickly. The philosophical community in Paris is divided about him. Some sympathize with his persecution, others think he brought it on himself with his provocations. January 1766. Rousseau and Hume leave Paris for England. They travel together, Hume arranging everything, Rousseau dependent on his help. Rousseau arrives in London to some fanfare. He is famous, a persecuted genius, a symbol of resistance to religious tyranny. The English public is curious about this exotic philosopher fleeing continental oppression. But Rousseau is deteriorating psychologically. The years of conflict, flight, condemnation have taken their toll. His paranoia, always present, is now severe. He trusts no one. He sees conspiracies everywhere. He is about to turn on Hume, his benefactor, and create one of the most bizarre episodes in the history of philosophy. The persecution was real. The books really were burned. The arrest warrants really were issued. Rousseau had genuine reasons to fear. But his response to persecution is disproportionate and increasingly detached from reality. He cannot distinguish between actual threats and imaginary ones. Everyone becomes a potential enemy. Every kindness is suspected as manipulation. The burned books make Rousseau a martyr to some, a dangerous heretic to others. Émile and The Social Contract are now more famous because they were condemned. People want to read what authorities tried to suppress. The books circulate clandestinely, their forbidden status making them more appealing. Rousseau's ideas spread precisely because they were attacked. This is the paradox of censorship. Burning books draws attention to them. Persecuting an author makes him sympathetic. The authorities who condemned Rousseau meant to silence him. Instead, they made him more influential. The ideas they feared spread more widely because of their attempts at suppression. By the end of 1765, Rousseau is one of the most famous and controversial figures in Europe. His books are banned in most of Catholic Europe but widely read in secret. He has enemies in every government and church. He also has admirers who see him as a prophet of truth persecuted by corrupt establishments. He is homeless, fleeing from place to place, unable to settle anywhere. The question is whether the persecution caused his paranoia or his paranoia invited persecution. Probably both. Rousseau's provocative writings challenged powerful institutions, so persecution was somewhat inevitable, but his response to criticism was always extreme, his sense of persecution always disproportionate. The external persecution and internal paranoia fed each other in an escalating spiral. One thing is clear, Rousseau's flight across Europe in 1762 to 1765 is the concrete consequence of his philosophy. He wrote ideas that threatened established order. Established order responded with suppression. He became living proof of his own argument that society persecutes truth and virtue. His life and his philosophy merged. The persecuted philosopher became the symbol of everything he wrote about. The individual crushed by unjust society. The truth-teller punished by the corrupt. The authentic soul unable to find a home in civilized world. The exile years running across Europe. January 13th, 1766. Rousseau arrives in London with David Hume. He is 53 years old, exhausted, ill, convinced he is being hunted. Hume has arranged everything: the journey, the reception, introductions to important people. The British intelligentsia is curious about this famous persecuted philosopher. They want to meet him, hear him speak, show their support for intellectual freedom against continental tyranny. Rousseau is presented at court. King George III offers him a pension. The gesture is meant as generosity, showing that England protects those persecuted elsewhere. But Rousseau is immediately suspicious. Why would the king give him money? What is expected in return? Is this an attempt to control him, to make him dependent, to silence his criticism? He does not refuse the pension outright, but he is uncomfortable accepting it. Hume finds Rousseau a place to live in the countryside at Wootton in Derbyshire. It is remote, quiet, surrounded by nature, exactly what Rousseau claims to want. Hume handles all arrangements, pays expenses, writes letters of introduction. He's being extraordinarily generous to someone he barely knows, motivated by sympathy and admiration. Rousseau moves to Wootton with Thérèse in March 1766. For a few weeks, things seem promising. The house is comfortable, the countryside is beautiful. Rousseau can walk, study plants, work on his writing. He begins composing his Confessions, the autobiography that will reveal everything about his life, proving his honesty and virtue to a world that has misunderstood him. But Rousseau cannot be content. Within weeks of arriving at Wootton, he begins to suspect Hume of treachery. The evidence for this betrayal exists only in Rousseau's mind, but to him it is overwhelming. Hume looks at him strangely. Hume's friends make ambiguous comments. Letters arrive late or not at all, clearly intercepted. Servants behave suspiciously. Everything points to conspiracy. The immediate trigger is a satirical letter published in a London newspaper. The letter, supposedly from Frederick the Great of Prussia to Rousseau, mocks Rousseau's persecution complex. It suggests that Rousseau enjoys being persecuted, that he seeks it out, that he would be unhappy without enemies. The tone is playful but cutting. The letter is actually written by Horace Walpole, a British writer, as a joke. Rousseau becomes convinced that Hume arranged for this letter to be published. Hume denies it, which proves nothing to Rousseau. Of course, Hume denies it. That is what conspirators do. Rousseau searches for more evidence. He finds it everywhere because he is looking for it. Hume's kindness was always suspicious. No one is that kind without ulterior motive. The whole rescue, the arrangement to come to England, the pension from the king, all part of a plot. But a plot to do what? Rousseau's theory becomes increasingly elaborate. Hume is working with Rousseau's enemies in France, particularly the philosophe. They want to destroy Rousseau's reputation. They brought him to England to isolate him, control his correspondence, spread lies about him. The pension from the king is part of the scheme, make Rousseau dependent so he cannot speak freely. Hume is baffled and then alarmed. He has done nothing but help Rousseau. He has spent his own money, his own time, his own reputation to assist someone he admired, and now he is being accused of conspiracy and betrayal. He writes to Rousseau asking for specifics. What exactly has Hume done wrong? Rousseau's responses are long, rambling, filled with insinuations but few concrete accusations. In July 1766, Rousseau writes Hume a devastating letter. He lists all the suspicions, all the supposed evidence of betrayal. The letter is simultaneously vague and accusatory. Hume is behind everything wrong that has happened. Hume manipulated him. Hume is part of the conspiracy of philosophers against him. The friendship is over. Rousseau wants nothing more to do with his benefactor. Hume is stunned. He shows the letter to friends. They advise him to publish a defense. Hume does so, printing a pamphlet with the correspondence between himself and Rousseau, showing the progression from gratitude to accusation. The pamphlet makes Rousseau look insane. Hume comes across as patient and generous, Rousseau as paranoid and ungrateful. The Hume-Rousseau quarrel becomes the scandal of European intellectual life in 1766. People take sides. Most support Hume. The evidence of his kindness and Rousseau's irrationality is clear. But some defend Rousseau, arguing that he has been so persecuted that suspicion is understandable, that Hume should have been more sensitive to his fragility. Voltaire gleefully enters the controversy on Hume's side. He publishes letters mocking Rousseau's paranoia. This is perfect for Voltaire, his enemy making a fool of himself publicly, alienating even those who tried to help him. Voltaire suggests that Rousseau is not just paranoid but deliberately performing persecution to gain sympathy. Rousseau remains at Wotton through 1766 and into 1767, but he is miserable. He is in a foreign country where he does not speak the language well. He is isolated in the countryside. He is convinced everyone around him is part of the conspiracy. Servants are spies, letters are intercepted, neighbors report on him. The paranoia is now total. In May 1767, Rousseau flees England suddenly and secretly. He does not tell anyone he is leaving. He and Thérèse simply disappear one day, traveling to Dover and crossing to France. This is dangerous because the arrest warrant in France is still technically active. But Rousseau apparently prefers the risk of French authorities to the certainty, in his mind, of the conspiracy surrounding him in England. He arrives in France under a false name. He wanders from place to place in the provinces, avoiding Paris, trying to stay hidden. He is technically a fugitive, though by 1767 French authorities have largely lost interest in him. The scandal has passed. Newer controversies occupy attention. If Rousseau stays quiet and out of Paris, he will probably be left alone. But Rousseau cannot stay quiet. He writes letters defending himself against Hume. He works on the Confessions, determined to tell his side of everything. He needs to justify himself, to explain to the world that he is innocent, that he has been wronged, that all his enemies are liars and conspirators. The years 1762 to 1767 are a descent into psychological chaos. Rousseau is not entirely wrong to feel persecuted. He has been condemned by religious and political authorities. His books have been burned. Arrest warrants have been issued. He has been forced to flee multiple countries. These are facts, not delusions. But his response goes far beyond the actual persecution. He cannot distinguish between authorities who genuinely oppose him and individuals who are trying to help him. Everyone becomes suspect. Every setback is evidence of conspiracy. He cannot accept that sometimes letters arrive late for mundane reasons, that sometimes people are just kind, that not everything is about him. The pattern is consistent across all these exile years. Someone offers help. Rousseau accepts. Then Rousseau decides the helper is actually an enemy. He accuses them of betrayal. He ends the relationship bitterly. Then he needs help again, and the cycle repeats. Madame d'Épinay, Grimm, Diderot, Hume, all follow the same pattern. What explains this? Is it mental illness? Rousseau shows clear signs of paranoid personality disorder. Pervasive distrust, preoccupation with conspiracies, inability to accept criticism, tendency to bear grudges, perception of attacks where none exist. By modern diagnostic standards, he would likely be diagnosed with serious psychological problems. But diagnosis does not fully explain. Many people with paranoid tendencies do not become influential philosophers. Many persecuted people do not develop systematic philosophical theories. There is something specifically Rousseauian about the combination, the philosophical conviction that society corrupts, the personal experience of persecution, the psychological tendency toward suspicion. Each element reinforces the others. His philosophy predicts persecution. He argues that society punishes authenticity, that civilized people resent natural virtue, that speaking truth brings punishment. When he is actually persecuted, this confirms his philosophy. The persecution is not random bad luck, but necessary consequence of his honesty. He is being punished for being good, exactly as his theory predicts. This makes him double down on the philosophy. If society persecutes him, that proves society is corrupt. If former friends turn against him, that proves friendship in civilized society is impossible. If he cannot find a home anywhere, that proves all actual societies are illegitimate. His personal suffering becomes evidence for his philosophical claims, but it also makes him unable to evaluate situations rationally. He cannot consider that maybe he is difficult to be around, that maybe his hypersensitivity creates problems, that maybe not everything is persecution. To admit this would be to question the philosophy. If his suffering is partly his own fault, then maybe society is not entirely corrupt. Maybe the problem is not all external. This he cannot accept. The exile years show the personal cost of radical philosophy. Rousseau has convinced himself that civilization is corrupt, that dependence is slavery, that society destroys authenticity, but he still lives in civilization, still depends on others, still functions within society. The gap between his ideals and his reality is unbearable. He cannot be the natural man he imagines. He cannot achieve the independence he values. He is trapped living the life he has philosophically condemned. Thérèse endures all of this silently. She travels with him from Switzerland to Paris to England to France again. She manages practical matters while he spirals into paranoia. She has no choice. She is completely dependent on him financially. She has no education that would allow her to support herself. Whatever she thinks about his accusations against Hume or his fear of conspiracies, she keeps to herself. By mid-1767, Rousseau has burned bridges across Europe. He has been condemned by France and Geneva. He has alienated the philosophers. He has quarreled with his British benefactor. He has no patron, no secure home, no friends he trusts. He is 55 years old, in declining health, living under a false name in provincial France, working obsessively on an autobiography that will prove his virtue and everyone else's villainy. The exile years are when Rousseau's persecution complex becomes absolute. Before, there was some reality testing, some ability to distinguish between real threats and imagined ones. Now, everything is conspiracy. Everyone is enemy. The world is united against him. He stands alone, the last honest man in a corrupt world. This total alienation will shape the final decade of his life. He returns to Paris eventually, still convinced of conspiracies but too tired to keep running. He will spend his last years writing defenses of himself that no one will publish, walking in Paris convinced everyone recognizes and despises him, preparing the Confessions and other autobiographical works that will be published after his death. But the exile years also produce his most personal writing. The Confessions begins during this period. Rousseau, judge of Jean-Jacques, his strangest work comes from these years of paranoia. His botanical writings, the one activity that gives him peace, develop now. The suffering is real, but it also drives creative work. Rousseau, the persecuted martyr, is more productive than Rousseau, the celebrated philosophe, ever was. The question is whether the work is valuable or whether it is the extended complaint of a disturbed mind. The Confessions will be recognized as a literary masterpiece, inventing the modern memoir. But is it truth-telling or self-justification? Are his defenses against conspiracy legitimate or delusional? Can we separate the insights from the paranoia, or are they inseparable? Confessions, inventing the modern memoir. I am commencing an undertaking, hitherto without precedent, and which will never find an imitator. I desire to set before my fellows the likeness of a man in all the truth of nature, and that man myself alone. I know my own heart and understand my fellow man, but I am made unlike anyone I have ever met. I will even venture to say that I am like no one in the whole world. If I am not better, at least I am different. These are the opening words of Rousseau's Confessions, begun in 1765 during his exile. They announce something unprecedented in literature, complete honesty about a life, including everything shameful, everything normally hidden. Previous autobiographies were defenses or celebrations. Rousseau promises something different, the truth, regardless of how it makes him look. Why does Rousseau write this? Partly to defend himself. He has been condemned as a heretic, attacked as a hypocrite, accused of countless vices. The Confessions will let him tell his side. He will explain his actions, reveal his motives, show that he has been misunderstood. The world has judged him based on lies and rumors. He will provide the truth. But there is something deeper. Rousseau believes he is uniquely authentic. Other people perform, hide their true selves, live according to social conventions. He has tried to live naturally, honestly, according to his own nature. By revealing everything about himself, he proves this authenticity. He has nothing to hide because he has not lived a false life like others. The Confessions is divided into 12 books, following his life chronologically from birth to roughly 1765. Rousseau writes it in sections over several years, revising constantly, reading portions aloud to small audiences to test their effect. He is obsessed with getting it right, with making people understand. The early books cover his childhood and youth, his mother's death, his father's affection and abandonment, the brutal apprenticeship, running away from Geneva, meeting Madame de Warrants. Rousseau includes details that shock his early listeners. He admits to stealing and lying. He describes his sexual peculiarities, his preference for submission and humiliation. He confesses to falsely accusing a servant girl of theft he committed himself. These admissions are supposed to prove his honesty. "Look," he says, "I am telling you things that make me look terrible. Would a dishonest person do this?" But there is something strange about the confessions. They are detailed about sexual matters and petty crimes, but vague about what might be truly damning. The abandoned children are mentioned but quickly justified. The quarrels with friends are described but always as their fault, not his. The Confessions is honest about some things and dishonest about others. Rousseau reveals what he considers his weaknesses but frames everything so he remains sympathetic. He was young, confused, overwhelmed. He made mistakes but always with good intentions. His victims were either not really harmed or deserved what happened. He is confessing but also excusing. The middle books describe his years in Paris, his friendship with the philosophes, his sudden fame from the essay on sciences and arts. Rousseau portrays himself as the honest outsider in a corrupt intellectual world. The philosophes are dishonest, vain, cliquish. He alone maintains integrity. They resent his success and his virtue. This is when the conspiracy against him begins. By the later books, the Confessions becomes less autobiography and more accusation. Diderot betrayed him. Grimm manipulated him. Madame d'Épinay lied about him. Hume conspired against him. Rousseau provides extensive details of these betrayals, quoting letters, reconstructing conversations, building cases. The book that started as self-revelation becomes prosecution of enemies. The paranoia pervades the later sections. Rousseau sees patterns everywhere. All his enemies are connected. They coordinate their attacks. They forge letters. They spread rumors. They intercept his correspondence. The conspiracy is vast and well organized. He alone sees it clearly. Everyone else is either part of it or deceived by it. But alongside the paranoia is genuine literary innovation. Rousseau writes about childhood from a child's perspective, trying to capture how things felt at the time rather than how an adult understands them. He writes about sexuality frankly, treating it as an important part of personality rather than something to euphemize or omit. He writes about shame and humiliation, making them central to human experience rather than aberrations. He writes about memory itself, acknowledging that he cannot remember everything accurately. Sometimes he admits he is guessing or inventing, but he claims that even false memories reveal truth about his character. How he remembers things shows who he is, even if the memories are not factually perfect. This is sophisticated understanding of memory and narrative identity, far ahead of its time. The Confessions creates the modern sense of the self as having an inner life, a psychological depth, a development through time. Previous autobiographies were records of external events, what the person did, where they went, whom they met. Rousseau makes internal experience the center. What matters is not just what happened, but how it felt, what it meant, how it shaped him. He writes about nature and feeling in ways that anticipate romanticism. Long passages describe walks in the countryside, the pleasure of solitude, the beauty of simple things. These are not just descriptions, but explorations of emotional states. Nature is not just scenery, but source of authentic experience, relief from social performance. He writes about relationships with psychological insight. His account of his time with Madame de Warrants is complex. Gratitude mixed with resentment, affection mixed with shame, dependence creating humiliation. His account of his infatuation with Sophie d'Audetot captures obsession's irrationality. He does not make himself look good, but he makes himself understandable. The Confessions will not be published until after Rousseau's death. He reads portions aloud to small groups in Paris in 1770 and 1771. The readings create scandal. Listeners are shocked by the sexual revelations, confused by the accusations against respected philosophe, uncertain whether to admire his honesty or condemn his indiscretions. Madame d'Épinay, who is portrayed very negatively in the Confessions, appeals to authorities to stop the readings. She argues that Rousseau is spreading lies about her and others, that he is mentally unstable, that the readings serve no legitimate purpose. The police order Rousseau to stop. He complies but continues working on the manuscript. The Confessions influences everything that comes after. Goethe's Poetry and Truth, Wordsworth's Prelude, all modern autobiography follows paths Rousseau opens. The idea that writers should reveal everything, that honesty requires exposing shame, that authenticity means showing the self without masks. All of this starts here. But the book also reveals Rousseau's limitations. He cannot see himself clearly. He thinks he is being completely honest, but he is constantly justifying himself. He thinks he is showing his faults, but he always explains them away. He thinks he is revealing universal human nature through his particular experience, but often he is just universalizing his own peculiarities. The abandoned children are the clearest case. Rousseau describes leaving each baby at the foundling hospital. He admits it bothers him, but then he justifies it extensively. He could not afford children. Thérèse's family would have corrupted them. The foundling hospital would give them proper working-class upbringings. He even suggests that hiding the children from his enemies protected them. None of this is believable. Rousseau abandoned his children because he did not want them, and he knows this, but he cannot admit it fully. He must frame it as somehow necessary, even beneficial. The man who promises complete honesty cannot be honest about his greatest crime. The confession becomes self-exoneration. The same pattern appears with the quarrels. Rousseau describes each break with friends but always makes himself the victim. Diderot was jealous, Grimm was manipulative, Hume was conspiring. It never occurs to Rousseau, or he never admits, that perhaps he is difficult, hypersensitive, impossible to satisfy. The fault is always external. This limits the confessions as self-knowledge even while making it fascinating as self-revelation. Rousseau reveals who he is precisely by trying to prove he is someone else. The gap between his self-image and his actual character, visible to readers, tells us more than his explicit claims. We learn about him despite him, not because of him. The Confessions also establishes a dangerous model, the writer as perpetual victim, justified in any behavior by suffering, entitled to expose others in defense of self. Every memoirist who reveals others' secrets, every autobiographer who settles scores, every confessional writer who weaponizes vulnerability, all follow Rousseau's example. But the power of the Confessions is undeniable. No one had written like this before. The sheer nakedness of it, the willingness to look shameful, the insistence on showing the self in all its contradiction. This is new. Whatever Rousseau's self-deceptions, he breaks open autobiography as form. After him, it is possible to write about the self differently. He dies before seeing the Confessions published. The manuscript passes to friends. It is published in 1782, 4 years after his death. It immediately becomes famous and controversial. Readers are shocked, fascinated, disturbed. Is this admirable honesty or inappropriate exposure? Is Rousseau hero or madman? The debate begins and never stops. The Confessions makes Rousseau immortal in a way his philosophical works never could. The political theory is important but abstract. The autobiography is intimate, particular, unforgettable. You may not agree with his ideas, but you feel like you know him. The man comes alive on the page in all his contradictions. Brilliant and paranoid, honest and self-deceiving, sympathetic and insufferable. Modern readers often find the Confessions more compelling than Rousseau's philosophy. The philosophy has dated, its arguments answered or superseded. But the autobiography remains powerful because personality transcends argument. Rousseau the man is more interesting than Rousseau the philosopher. His life, especially as he tells it, has dramatic force his theories lack. The irony is that Rousseau writes the Confessions to defend himself and ends up revealing exactly what his critics charged: hypersensitivity, paranoia, self-absorption, inability to maintain relationships. But this failure as self-justification succeeds as literature. The Confessions works not because Rousseau proves his virtue, but because he reveals his humanity, flawed and fascinating. The general will, philosophy's most dangerous idea. The general will is the most important and most dangerous concept Rousseau invents. Everything in his political philosophy depends on it. All the revolutionary violence that follows can be traced back to it. Understanding what it is and why it is dangerous requires close examination. Start with what Rousseau says it is not. The general will is not the will of all. The will of all is simply the sum of individual private wills. If you ask everyone what they want and add up the answers, you get the will of all. Each person votes their private interest. The result is a collection of individual preferences, nothing more. The general will is something different, something higher. It is what everyone would want if they were thinking about the common good rather than private advantage. It is not what people actually want, but what they should want. It is not their expressed preferences, but their true interests properly understood. How do you discover the general will? Rousseau gives contradictory answers. Sometimes he suggests that citizens vote and the majority reveals the general will. But this cannot be right because he explicitly distinguishes general will from will of all, and majority voting just gives you will of all. Other times he suggests that the general will emerges when citizens vote correctly, setting aside private interests and thinking only of the common good. But this requires citizens to already know what the common good is, which is circular. Sometimes Rousseau implies that the general will is what a wise legislator would decree. The legislator sees clearly what is good for the community and establishes laws accordingly. But this makes the general will the will of one wise person, not the general will at all. Other times the general will seems almost mystical, a kind of emergent property of the community that transcends individual minds. The ambiguity is not accidental. Rousseau needs the general will to be both democratic and correct, both popular and right. It must come from the people to be legitimate. It must aim at the common good to have authority. But there is no guarantee that what people want is what is good for them. Rousseau solves this by making the general will definitionally correct. Whatever it is, it aims at the common good. If it does not aim at the common good, it is not the general will. This move makes the concept unfalsifiable and therefore useless as a check on power. Any government can claim to represent the general will. Any policy can be justified as serving the common good. Any dissent can be dismissed as private interest or error. There is no empirical test for whether something is the general will. It is whatever the person invoking it says it is. Rousseau adds another layer. The general will is always right. It cannot err. This is not an observation but a definition. The general will is defined as that which aims at the common good. Therefore, it is always right. But this makes the concept completely empty. Saying the general will is always right is like saying bachelors are always unmarried. It is true by definition and tells us nothing. The problem emerges when we ask what happens when someone disagrees with what is claimed to be the general will. Rousseau's answer, the person is wrong. If the general will says X and you think not X, you are mistaken. You have confused your private will with the general will. You think you want not X, but you really want X. You just do not know it yet. This is where forcing people to be free comes in. If the general will says you must do X and you refuse, you are not being free. You are enslaved to your private will, your passions, your ignorance. The community must force you to obey, which is really forcing you to be free. Compulsion is liberation. Obedience is autonomy. The logic seems insane, but it follows from Rousseau's premises. He has defined freedom as obedience to the general will. He has defined the general will as always correct. Therefore, obedience to the general will is always freedom. If you resist, you are not free but enslaved. Forcing you to obey liberates you from slavery to passion and brings you to true freedom of rational willing. This is not just bad political philosophy. It is the intellectual foundation for totalitarianism. Every totalitarian regime claims to represent the people's true interests. Every totalitarian regime claims that dissent is false consciousness or corruption. Every totalitarian regime claims that force is necessary to liberate people from their own ignorance. Rousseau provides the logic for all of this. Consider how this works in practice. The French Revolution declares that it represents the general will. Therefore, its policies serve the common good. Anyone who opposes these policies is opposing their own true interests. They are enemies of the people. They must be forced to comply or eliminated. The terror follows directly from this logic. Robespierre is explicit about this. He quotes Rousseau constantly. The revolution is the general will in action. Virtue is alignment with the revolution. Vice is opposition to it. Enemies of the revolution are enemies of France, enemies of the people, enemies of themselves. They must be destroyed for their own good and the good of all. The guillotine becomes the instrument of forcing people to be free. Death is liberation from the slavery of private interest and counter-revolutionary consciousness. This sounds like parody, but it is what Robespierre actually believes and says. He has read Rousseau carefully. He is applying the logic of the general will consistently. Rousseau would have been horrified. He imagined small, peaceful republics, not revolutionary violence. But the problem is not misinterpretation. The problem is that Rousseau's concepts, once unleashed, cannot be controlled. The general will is inherently totalitarian because it subsumes individual will completely and claims absolute authority. Consider the alternatives Rousseau rejects. Liberal political philosophy accepts that people have different interests. Government's role is to mediate these conflicts, protect rights, allow people to pursue their own conceptions of the good. Government does not represent a unified will but manages competing wills. This is messy but realistic. Rousseau finds this intolerable. He wants unity, not conflict. He wants a society where everyone wills the same thing. This requires eliminating difference, whether through education, propaganda, or force. Citizens must be shaped to will correctly. Those who cannot be shaped must be excluded or destroyed. This is why Rousseau's politics tend toward totalitarianism. He cannot accept pluralism. He cannot accept that people legitimately disagree about the common good. He cannot accept that politics is about compromise rather than perfect unity. He wants complete solutions, and complete solutions require complete control. The general will also eliminates any sphere of private life protected from political power. In liberal thought, there are things government cannot do even if majorities want them. Rights protect individuals from majorities, but Rousseau rejects this. When you enter the social contract, you surrender all rights to the community. The general will can do anything it judges necessary for the common good. There are no limits. This means the general will can take your property if it serves the common good. It can control your religion if your religion threatens social cohesion. It can demand your life if the community needs defending. You consented to all of this by entering society. Your consent was absolute and irrevocable. But when did you consent? You never signed a contract. You were born into society. Rousseau sometimes treats consent as hypothetical. This is what rational people would agree to. But hypothetical consent is not consent. Saying that rational people would agree is not the same as actual people agreeing. And who determines what rational people would agree to? Those in power naturally. The general will creates another problem. It makes all dissent illegitimate. In liberal democracy, opposition is normal and healthy. Today's minority might become tomorrow's majority. But in Rousseau's system, there is no legitimate opposition. The general will is right. Opposition to it is wrong. Tolerating opposition means tolerating error and vice. This is why Rousseau's system tends toward one-party states. If the general will is unified and correct, why allow opposition parties? They represent either private interests or mistakes about the common good. Either way, they should not exist. The party that represents the general will should rule alone. Communist regimes follow exactly this logic. The party represents the proletariat's true interests. Opposition parties represent bourgeois interests or false consciousness. They must be banned. The party has monopoly on power not through force but through legitimacy. It represents the general will, even if most people disagree. When most people disagree, this creates no crisis for the theory. The people are wrong. They do not understand their own interests. They must be educated, reformed, re-educated. If they resist, they must be forced to be free. The camps, the purges, the terror, all follow from the logic that the party knows the people's true interests better than the people themselves. Rousseau provides one more dangerous idea, the civil religion. Citizens must believe certain things, that God exists, that the soul is immortal, that virtue is rewarded and vice punished, that the social contract is sacred. These beliefs are necessary for social cohesion. Anyone who does not accept them must be banished. Anyone who accepts them but acts against them must be executed. This is theocracy justified by Rousseau's atheistic reasoning. The civil religion is not about truth, but about social utility. We do not know if God exists, but society needs people to believe God exists. Therefore, belief must be enforced. Doubt must be punished. Dissent from required beliefs is treason. Modern totalitarian ideologies follow this pattern. Marxism-Leninism becomes a civil religion. You must believe in historical materialism, the dictatorship of the proletariat, the inevitable victory of communism. If you doubt, you are counter-revolutionary. Your doubt threatens social cohesion. You must be eliminated. Fascism does the same. You must believe in the nation, the leader, the destiny of the race. Your private doubts are treason. Your individual conscience is selfishness. You must subordinate everything to the collective will, which the leader embodies. Anyone who refuses is not merely wrong, but evil. All of this traces back to Rousseau's general will, the idea that there is one correct answer to political questions, the idea that this answer can be known with certainty, the idea that those who see it have authority to impose it, the idea that resistance to it is not disagreement but disease, the idea that force is justified to make people embrace what is good for them. Liberal democracy rejects all of this. It assumes people reasonably disagree about the good. It protects rights even for those with wrong opinions. It allows opposition, protects dissent, permits diversity. It accepts that politics is about managing conflicts, not achieving unity. It is modest about what government can accomplish and skeptical about claims of absolute truth. Rousseau's influence on later political thought is complex. He genuinely values freedom and equality. He genuinely opposes arbitrary power. He genuinely wants legitimate government. But the concepts he creates to achieve these goals enable their opposites. The general will, meant to preserve freedom, destroys it. Popular sovereignty, meant to limit government, makes it unlimited. The social contract, meant to be consensual, becomes compulsory. Defenders of Rousseau argue he has been misunderstood, that properly interpreted his philosophy supports democracy and freedom. This is partly true. Rousseau's intentions are better than his concepts. But intentions do not matter if the concepts enable tyranny. The question is not what Rousseau meant, but what his ideas do when implemented. and what they do is provide intellectual justification for totalitarianism. Not fascism specifically, not communism specifically, but the general structure of totalitarian thought, the unified will, the subordination of individual to collective, the identification of dissent with error, the legitimacy of force to create unity, the elimination of private spheres, the enforcement of belief. This does not mean we should not read Rousseau. His diagnosis of inequality is valuable. His critique of property is powerful. His emphasis on popular sovereignty influences democratic theory positively. But we must read him critically, recognizing that his most important concept is also his most dangerous. The general will is philosophy's Trojan horse. It looks like freedom but contains slavery. Virtue and Terror, Robespierre's Rousseau. July 14th, 1789. The Bastille falls. The French Revolution begins. Rousseau has been dead 11 years. He cannot see what is coming, cannot know that his ideas are about to be tested in blood and fire. But his spirit haunts the revolution from the first moment. His books, banned for decades, are now everywhere. His ideas about popular sovereignty, the general will, and legitimate government provide the revolution's vocabulary and logic. Maximilien Robespierre is 21 when Rousseau dies in 1778. He is studying law in Paris, a serious provincial boy, scholarship student, isolated and ambitious. He reads Rousseau obsessively. He will later claim he met Rousseau once, though this may be invention or exaggeration. Whether he met him or not, Robespierre absorbs Rousseau's philosophy completely. By 1789, Robespierre is a lawyer in Arras, elected to represent the Third Estate in the Estates General. He is not initially prominent. He is a mediocre speaker, his voice thin, his manner stiff. But he is consistent, principled, incorruptible. He believes in the people, in virtue, in the perfectibility of society through proper political arrangements. He believes in Rousseau. The early revolution is moderate. The National Assembly writes a constitution, limits the king's power, declares rights. This is not Rousseau's vision. Constitutional monarchy, balance of powers, individual rights. These are liberal ideas, closer to Montesquieu or Locke than Rousseau. Rousseau wanted popular sovereignty and the general will, not institutional checks and balances. Robespierre pushes for more radical measures. Universal male suffrage, not voting restricted to property owners. Direct democracy where possible, not just representation. Subordination of individual rights to the general good. His speeches echo Rousseau's language. The people are sovereign. The general will must govern. Private interests must yield to public virtue. By 1792, the revolution radicalizes. The king is tried for treason. Robespierre argues for execution. The king conspired against the revolution, against France, against the people. He cannot be judged by ordinary law because he stands outside law. The people's will demands his death. The general will requires it. Louis XVI is guillotined in January 1793. War with European monarchies intensifies. Internal opposition grows. The revolution faces enemies outside and inside. Robespierre and the Jacobins argue that emergency measures are necessary. Individual rights must be suspended. Terror must be deployed, not arbitrary terror but principled terror. Terror in service of virtue. This is pure Rousseau. The general will justify force against those who oppose it. Enemies of the revolution are enemies of the people, enemies of themselves. They must be eliminated not from cruelty, but from principle. This is not revenge, but justice. Not violence, but purification. In June 1793, Robespierre and the Jacobins take control of the Committee of Public Safety, effectively the government. For the next year, until July 1794, Robespierre dominates the revolution. This period is called the Terror. The name is accurate. Estimates of those executed range from 16,000 to 40,000. Hundreds of thousands are imprisoned. Entire regions are depopulated in counterinsurgency campaigns. Robespierre justifies every bit of it with Rousseauian logic. The revolution represents the general will of the French people. Opposition to the revolution is opposition to the people themselves. Such opposition cannot be tolerated. It must be destroyed. This is not tyranny, but democracy. The people, through the revolution, are exercising their sovereignty. He makes this explicit in a speech in February 1794. If the mainspring of popular government in peacetime is virtue, amid revolution it is at the same time virtue and terror, virtue without which terror is fatal, terror without which virtue is impotent. Terror is not opposed to virtue, but its necessary complement. You cannot have revolutionary virtue without revolutionary terror. This formulation is Rousseau's forcing people to be free made concrete. Citizens must be virtuous. If they resist virtue, they must be forced. Terror is the forcing mechanism. The guillotine liberates people from their private wills and aligns them with the general will. Death is freedom, properly understood. Robespierre establishes the cult of the supreme being, directly based on Rousseau's civil religion. France must have a national religion that supports republican virtue. Not Catholicism, which is superstitious and supports monarchy. Not atheism, which is immoral and threatens social order. A new civic religion that teaches that God exists, virtue is rewarded, and the republic is sacred. In June 1794, Robespierre organizes a festival of the Supreme Being. Elaborate ceremonies in Paris celebrate the new religion. Robespierre presides, dressed in blue coat with tricolor sash, carrying flowers. He delivers speeches about virtue and the sacred character of the revolution. The whole spectacle is strange, forced, revealing the gap between revolutionary ideals and revolutionary reality. Who counts as enemy of the revolution? Initially nobles and counter-revolutionaries, then moderates who want to slow the revolution, then anyone accused of insufficient enthusiasm, then fellow revolutionaries who disagree with Robespierre on strategy. The Terror's logic is inherently expansive. If the general will demands purity, then any impurity is treason. Georges Danton, one of the revolution's leaders, is executed in April 1794. His crime is moderation. He wants to end the Terror, to consolidate the revolution's gains. Robespierre argues this is counter-revolutionary. The revolution cannot stop while enemies exist. Demanding moderation is itself extremism, proof of corruption. Danton goes to the guillotine. The Hébertists, radical revolutionaries to Robespierre's left, are executed in March 1794. Their crime is ultra-radicalism. They want to push the revolution further than Robespierre thinks wise. But opposing Robespierre's judgment about the revolution's proper pace is opposing the general will. They too are guillotined. Notice the logic. If you think the Terror goes too far, you are an enemy. If you think it does not go far enough, you are also an enemy. Only exact agreement with Robespierre's position is loyalty. Any deviation is treason. This is not Robespierre's personal authoritarianism. This is the logic of the general will. There is one correct position, and disagreement with it is wrong. The Law of 22. Prairial, passed in June 1794, removes most legal protections for the accused. Trials are summary. Evidence requirements are relaxed. The accused have no right to defense counsel. The definition of counter-revolutionary activity is expanded to include almost anything. Acquittal becomes nearly impossible. The guillotine works constantly. Robespierre speaks of creating a republic of virtue. This will be a society where citizens love virtue for its own sake, where the general will operate smoothly because everyone wills the good, where freedom and order coincide perfectly. This is Rousseau's legitimate society attempted in practice. It requires eliminating everyone who does not share the vision. But how many must be eliminated? Robespierre does not know. He only knows that the Republic of Virtue has not yet been achieved, so more purging is necessary. The Terror can only end when virtue is secured. But virtue can never be fully secured because humans are corruptible. Therefore, the Terror can never end. It is permanent revolution, permanent purging, permanent violence. By July 1794, the Terror turns on itself. Even members of the Committee of Public Safety fear they will be next. No one is safe. Robespierre's increasing isolation and rigid moralism frighten his colleagues. On 9 Thermidor, the National Convention turns against him. He is arrested, outlawed, executed the next day, along with his closest allies. The Terror ends with Robespierre's death. France pulls back from the abyss, but the damage is done. Tens of thousands are dead. French society is traumatized. The revolution's ideals are discredited. Within a decade, Napoleon seizes power, and France has an emperor again. What is Rousseau's responsibility for this? He did not advocate violence. He imagined peaceful republics. He would have been horrified by the guillotine. But his ideas enabled the Terror's logic. Robespierre did not misunderstand Rousseau. He understood him perfectly and applied his concepts consistently. The general will justify eliminating opposition. Forcing people to be free justified the guillotine. The civil religion justified punishing wrong beliefs. The subordination of private to public justified confiscations and executions. Every element of Rousseau's political philosophy found expression in the Terror. Some argue the Terror was caused by circumstances, not ideas. France was at war, facing invasion, dealing with counter-revolution. Emergency measures were necessary. Any government would have used force. This is partly true. Circumstances mattered, but circumstances do not explain the Terror's logic, its systematic character, its self-justifying ideology. Other revolutions face similar circumstances without similar terror. The American Revolution faces war and internal opposition without systematic purging. The difference is ideological. The Americans have liberal ideas about limited government, individual rights, toleration. The French revolutionaries have Rousseau's ideas about the general will, popular sovereignty, and virtue. This does not mean Rousseau caused the French Revolution or the Terror. Historical causation is complex. Many factors contributed, but Rousseau provided the intellectual framework that made the terror coherent and justifiable to its perpetrators. Without Rousseau, the terror might still have happened, but it would have been different, less systematic, less confident in its righteousness. The terror reveals the danger of political perfectionism. Robespierre wants to create perfect society. He believes this is possible through proper political arrangements and virtuous citizens. When reality does not match the ideal, he blames individuals for insufficient virtue rather than questioning the ideal. The solution is always more purging, more terror, more force. This pattern repeats in every revolutionary regime influenced by Rousseau's utopianism. Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, all pursue perfect societies. All find reality falling short. All respond with terror to eliminate the imperfect humans preventing perfection. Millions die in the gap between ideal and reality. The body count attributed to Rousseau's ideas is debatable but enormous. The French Revolution, 40,000 executed, hundreds of thousands dead in civil war and foreign wars. The Russian Revolution and Stalin's rule. Estimates range from 7 to 20 million dead. Mao's China, 40 to 80 million dead from famine, persecution, cultural revolution. Pol Pot's Cambodia, 1.5 to 2 million dead from execution and forced labor, roughly 25% of the population. Not all of these deaths are directly Rousseau's fault, but the ideological structure enabling them traces back to his concepts. The idea that there is a unified popular will that justifies eliminating opposition. The idea that creating proper social conditions can perfect humanity. The idea that force is legitimate to align individuals with the collective good. These are Rousseau's contributions to political thought. Compare this to liberal political philosophy. Liberal thought assumes humans are imperfect and will remain so. It does not try to create perfect societies, but livable ones. It accepts pluralism, protects dissent, limits government power. It is modest in its ambitions and skeptical about political solutions. It does not produce utopias. It also does not produce genocides. Rousseau's tragedy is that he wanted to help humanity and ended up providing the logic for destroying it. He valued freedom and enabled totalitarianism. He opposed arbitrary power and created concepts that justified absolute power. His intentions were good. His effects were catastrophic. Robespierre's final words, spoken to his accusers in the convention, could serve as epitaph for Rousseauian politics. "I ask for death. He got it. So did tens of thousands of others. The Republic of Virtue drowned in blood. The general will express itself through the guillotine. Forcing people to be free killed them." This is what happens when Rousseau's philosophy meets political reality. The Romantic Revolution, feeling over reason. Rousseau dies in 1778, but another version of him is just being born. Not the political Rousseau who inspires revolutionaries, but the romantic Rousseau who inspires poets, artists, musicians. This Rousseau values feeling over reason, nature over civilization, authenticity over convention. He becomes the father of Romanticism, the movement that will dominate European culture for half a century. The Enlightenment elevated reason. Humans could understand nature through science, improve society through rational reform, progress toward perfection through knowledge. Emotion was suspect, associated with superstition and irrationality. The goal was to govern passions through reason, to be rational creatures rather than emotional animals. Rousseau rejects all of this. Reason corrupts, emotion is authentic. Civilization's error was elevating reason over feeling. Natural man followed his sentiments. He lived in the present, responding to immediate feeling. He was happy precisely because he did not think too much, calculate too carefully, reason too abstractly. This elevation of feeling appears throughout Rousseau's work, but becomes most influential through Julie or the New Eloise, published in 1761. It is an epistolary novel, told through letters between characters. Julie is a young woman from a noble family. Saint-Preux is her tutor, a commoner. They fall in love. The love is passionate, overwhelming, all-consuming, but they cannot marry. Class difference makes it impossible. Julie's father forces her to marry Volmar, an older, wealthy man. She obeys, though her heart still belongs to Saint-Preux. The novel explores this triangle: passionate love versus duty, feeling versus social obligation, authenticity versus convention. Julie becomes the best-selling novel of the 18th century. People read it obsessively. They weep over it. They write Rousseau letters saying the characters feel more real than actual people. Young women identify with Julie. Young men identify with Saint-Preux. The cult of sensibility sweeps Europe. What makes Julie revolutionary is its treatment of emotion as valuable in itself. Previous literature presented passion as dangerous, something to be controlled. Julie presents passion as the most authentic part of human experience, Saint-Proust's love, though socially impossible, is more real than Julie's socially appropriate marriage. Feeling trumps convention. This idea reshapes European culture. The Romantic movement takes Rousseau's elevation of emotion and makes it central. Poetry should express genuine feeling, not follow formal rules. Art should capture sublime emotional experiences, not just represent reality accurately. Music should move the heart, not just please the ear intellectually. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe reads Rousseau as a young man. The influence is obvious in The Sorrows of Young Werther, published in 1774. Werther is a sensitive young man who falls in love with a woman promised to another. Unable to have her, unable to control his feelings, he kills himself. The novel is pure romantic sensibility, feeling so intense it destroys, passion more important than life. Werther causes a sensation. Young men across Europe dress like Werther, affect his mannerisms, some even imitate his suicide. This is the romantic temperament Rousseau enables. Feeling so intensely that conventional life becomes unbearable, authentic emotion in conflict with social reality, death preferable to compromise. William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge in England absorb Rousseau's influence. Their poetry celebrates nature, childhood, spontaneous feeling. Wordsworth's preface to lyrical ballads in 1800 defines poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. This is Rousseauian aesthetics. Not crafted artifice, but authentic expression. Not learned technique, but natural emotion. Wordsworth's The Prelude describes his own development, influenced by Rousseau's Confessions. The poem is autobiography, a spiritual journey, charting growth from childhood innocence through experience to mature consciousness. Nature is teacher and healer, cities are corrupting, simple rural people are more authentic than sophisticated urbanites. These are all Rousseau's themes. The romantic celebration of childhood comes from Rousseau. Before Rousseau, childhood was seen as incomplete adulthood, a phase to move through quickly. Children were small adults, dressed like adults, expected to behave like adults. Rousseau transforms this. Childhood is valuable in itself, perhaps superior to adulthood. Children are closer to nature, more authentic, uncorrupted by civilization. Wordsworth's ode, Intimations of Immortality, expresses this perfectly. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. We start pure and are corrupted by maturity. Civilization is a prison. Education is loss. We spend adulthood trying to recover what we had naturally as children. This reverses previous thinking entirely. It makes innocence the ideal and experience the fall. It makes ignorance preferable to knowledge. It makes feeling superior to reason. It is deeply anti-enlightenment, and it comes directly from Rousseau. The romantic cult of nature follows the same pattern. Nature is authentic, cities are artificial. Nature heals, civilization sickens. The romantic poet walks in mountains and forests, seeking sublime experiences that transcend reason. This is Rousseau walking at Hermenonville, Rousseau collecting plants, Rousseau claiming his happiest moments were alone in nature. Lord Byron takes this further. His heroes are isolated, misunderstood, at war with society. They are too authentic for the corrupt world. They cannot compromise, cannot fit in, cannot accept convention. They are tortured by their own intensity, destroyed by their refusal to conform. This is Rousseau's self-image turned into romantic archetype. The Romantics also embrace Rousseau's idea of the authentic self beneath social masks. Society forces us to perform, to hide our true feelings, to present acceptable versions of ourselves. The authentic self is buried under layers of social convention. The goal is to strip away these layers, to find and express the true self regardless of social consequences. This creates the romantic obsession with sincerity. What matters is not whether you are good by conventional standards, but whether you are true to yourself. Better to be authentically bad than inauthentically good. Better to follow your own nature, even if destructive, than to conform to others' expectations. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in 1818 engages directly with Rousseau. The creature reads Rousseau and applies his ideas. The creature is naturally good but corrupted by society's rejection. He wants love and community but is denied them. Society's cruelty makes him monstrous. This is Rousseau's argument. Humans are naturally good, society makes them evil. The Romantic movement spreads across Europe. In Germany, Sturm und Drang emphasizes emotion, individual experience, rebellion against convention. In France, despite the revolution's excesses, Romantic writers like Chateaubriand and Madame de Staël continue Rousseau's themes. In Russia, Pushkin and Lermontov create romantic heroes influenced by Rousseau's ideas. Music is transformed. Beethoven shifts from classical to romantic style, emphasizing emotional expression over formal perfection. His symphonies tell emotional stories, express subjective feelings, break rules when necessary for expressive purposes. This is musical Rousseauianism, authenticity over convention, feeling over form. Rousseau himself was a musician and music theorist. His writings on music emphasize melody over harmony, emotional expression over technical complexity. Music should touch the heart directly, not impress the mind intellectually. The Romantics follow this principle. Schubert, Schumann, Chopin, Liszt all prioritize emotional content over formal structure. The Romantic emphasis on individual genius also comes from Rousseau. The genius is someone with natural gifts, not primarily learned skills. The genius follows inner voice, not external rules. The genius may break conventions, shock audiences, violate standards, but this proves authenticity rather than incompetence. Rousseau's self-image as misunderstood genius becomes the Romantic artist's identity. This has positive and negative effects. Positively, it liberates artists to experiment, to express subjective experience, to break stifling conventions. It makes art more personal, more emotionally powerful, more willing to explore difficult feelings. The great Romantic poetry, music, art genuinely moves people in ways more formal classical work sometimes does not. Negatively, it encourages self-indulgence, narcissism, contempt for technique and discipline. If authentic feeling is all that matters, why learn craft? If genius is natural, why study? If convention is always artificial, why respect any standards? The Romantic artist as misunderstood genius, too authentic for the corrupt world, becomes a cliché, an excuse for mediocrity. The Romantic elevation of feeling over reason also has political consequences. If emotion is more authentic than thought, if spontaneity is better than careful planning, if sincerity matters more than correctness, then political passion becomes virtue. The revolutionary who feels intensely is more legitimate than the reformer who calculates carefully. This feeds into nationalism. The nation is not a rational political arrangement but an organic community bound by shared feeling. National identity is not chosen but felt. Loyalty to nation transcends reason. This Romantic nationalism, influenced by Rousseau, leads to the national movements of the 19th century and eventually to the nationalist extremism of the 20th. The Romantic period also sees the cult of the noble savage become widespread. Rousseau's state of nature becomes the South Pacific for Romantic travelers, Native Americans for American Romantics, medieval peasants for European nostalgists. Wherever civilization has not yet reached, there you find noble savages living naturally and happily. This is mostly fantasy. Actual indigenous peoples do not match Romantic projections. But the fantasy serves a purpose. It allows Romantics to criticize their own societies by pointing to imagined alternatives. The noble savage is what we would be if civilization had not corrupted us. The fact that no such people exist is irrelevant. By the 1820s and 1830s, Romanticism dominates European culture. The movement is diverse. Some Romantics are politically radical, others conservative. Some celebrate medieval Christianity, others pagan nature. Some are nationalists, others cosmopolitan. But they share Rousseauian assumptions: feeling over reason, nature over civilization, authenticity over convention, individual over society. The Romantic movement eventually exhausts itself. By mid-century, realism reacts against Romantic excess. Artists return to representing reality as it is, rather than as they feel it should be. The Industrial Revolution makes Romantic nostalgia for nature seem quaint. Science's successes make pure emotion seem inadequate as a guide to truth. But Romanticism never entirely disappears. Its influence continues through modernism and into contemporary culture. The idea that authentic self-expression is art's highest goal, that feeling validates, that natural is better than artificial, that civilization corrupts innocence. These remain widespread assumptions. They are Rousseau's legacy. The Romantic Rousseau is softer than the political Rousseau. His influence produces poetry rather than guillotines, paintings rather than purges. But it is not entirely benign. The elevation of feeling over reason, the contempt for civilization, the nostalgia for impossible pasts, the celebration of individual genius over collective standards, these create their own problems. The Romantic temperament cannot build, it can only critique, it cannot govern, it can only rebel, it cannot create institutions, it can only express feelings about them. This makes Romanticism powerful in art, but dangerous in politics. When Romantic sensibility meets political power, the results are often disastrous, as the French Revolution showed. Rousseau the Romantic and Rousseau the Revolutionary are not separate figures. They are the same person, the same sensibility applied to different domains. Both reject reason for feeling. Both value authenticity over convention. Both see civilization as corruption. Both want impossible perfection. One writes poetry, the other makes revolution. Both leave destruction in their wake. The final years, madness and music. May 1767. Rousseau returns to France secretly under a false name. The arrest warrant from 1762 is still technically active, but authorities have lost interest. If he stays quiet, avoids Paris, causes no new scandals, he will probably be left alone. He settles in a village in the provinces with Thérèse, trying to disappear into anonymity. But Rousseau cannot stay quiet. He continues writing defenses of himself. He writes Rousseau, Judge of Jean-Jacques, a bizarre dialogue where Rousseau the judge interrogates Jean-Jacques the accused about his life and character. It is the confessions from a different angle, still attempting to prove his innocence and everyone else's guilt. The dialogue form reveals his psychological fragmentation. He is splitting himself, creating distance from his own life so he can judge it objectively. But the objectivity is false. Rousseau the judge invariably finds Jean-Jacques innocent, misunderstood, persecuted. The whole work is elaborate self-justification disguised as neutral assessment. Rousseau tries to deposit the manuscript at Notre Dame Cathedral, planning to place it on the altar as an appeal to God and posterity. He finds the gates to the choir locked. He takes this as confirmation of the conspiracy. Even the church is against him. Even God's house is close to him. The paranoia is now total and delusional. He walks the streets of Paris, convinced everyone recognizes him and hates him. People stare at him, he believes, with hostility and contempt. They whisper about him. They point. They have been told lies about him by the philosophers, and they believe the lies. He is famous and alone, recognized and rejected. In reality, most people probably ignore him. He is an older man walking in Paris, somewhat eccentric in dress, talking to himself occasionally. Some recognize him as the famous philosopher, some are curious, most are indifferent. But Rousseau experiences all attention as persecution, all curiosity as hostility. He composes music. This is his one peaceful activity. He supports himself by copying musical scores, doing the work carefully, charging modest fees. The work requires attention to detail, leaving no room for paranoid thoughts. He also writes about music theory and composes songs. Music is where Rousseau finds something like contentment. He writes Reveries of the Solitary Walker in his final years, 10 chapters called Walks, each meditation on a theme. This is Rousseau at his most peaceful and most sad. He has given up on defending himself, given up on being understood, given up on society accepting him. Now he writes only for himself, trying to find tranquility in isolation. The Reveries returns to themes from his earlier work but with elegiac tone. Nature still heals, civilization still corrupts, but now there is no hope of reform. The walker is permanently solitary, finding brief moments of happiness in botanical excursions and memories. The fifth walk describes his time on the island of Saint-Pierre, remembered as Paradise Lost. Rousseau discovers botany in his final years. He collects plants, studies them, creates herbariums. Botany offers what human society cannot: order without deception, beauty without vanity, classification without judgment. Plants do not conspire, they do not lie, they do not persecute, they simply are. For someone exhausted by human relationships, this is refuge. The final works show a man collapsing inward. The Confessions tried to address the world, to justify himself to society. Rousseau, judge of Jean-Jacques, still imagined an audience, a posterity that would vindicate him. The Reveries abandon this hope. Society will never understand. He writes now only to record his own feelings, to capture moments of peace before death. In 1770, after years of living under false names, Rousseau returns openly to Paris. He is 58, in poor health, no longer caring about the arrest warrant. Authorities ignore him. He lives quietly, copying music, walking, avoiding the intellectual circles that once celebrated and then rejected him. He sees almost no one. Thérèse manages practical matters. He retreats into his own mind. The few people who visit describe an old man, prematurely aged, suspicious but sometimes surprisingly lucid. He can discuss philosophy and politics with insight. Then he shifts suddenly to complaints about conspiracies, convinced that everyone has united against him. The brilliance and madness coexist, making conversation exhausting. He continues reading portions of the Confessions to small groups when anyone will listen. The readings are uncomfortable. Listeners do not know how to respond to intimate revelations about sexuality and shame. Some are moved by his honesty. Others are disturbed by what seems exhibitionism. The readings get him more notoriety but not understanding. The philosophers, his former friends, discuss him with mixture of pity and exasperation. Diderot, asked about Rousseau late in his life, says, "There is a man who would have been better off never having been born." Grimm refuses to discuss him. Voltaire continues mocking him in letters. They have all moved on. He remains trapped in the past, relitigating old quarrels. Thérèse is sometimes sympathetic, sometimes resentful. They married in 1768, late in life, more for legal protection than affection. She cares for him as he declines, but she also suffers from his paranoia. He sometimes suspects her of being part of the conspiracy. He questions her about conversations with neighbors, imagining she is spying on him. Their relationship, never passionate, becomes one of mutual endurance. In 1778, a patron offers Rousseau a cottage at Hermenonville, an estate north of Paris. The offer is generous, asking nothing in return. The patron, the Marquis de Girardin, admires Rousseau and wants to help him. Rousseau accepts. In May 1778, he and Thérèse move to the cottage. The setting is beautiful: woods, a lake, gardens. Rousseau walks daily, studies plants, seems more peaceful than he has been in years. He writes less, walks more. Girardin visits and finds him pleasant company when not discussing his persecutions. For a few weeks, it seems Rousseau might end his days quietly. July 2nd, 1778. Rousseau wakes early, complains of feeling ill. He walks a bit despite Thérèse's urging to rest. He returns, seems to feel worse. Around mid-morning, he collapses. By afternoon, he is dead. The cause is unclear. Possibly a stroke, possibly a heart attack, possibly complications from his chronic urinary problems. He is 66 years old. Girardin arranges burial on an island in a lake on the estate. The grave is marked with poplar trees and a simple monument. Rousseau is buried at night by torchlight, the ceremony small and private. Later, the grave becomes a pilgrimage site. Admirers visit to honor the philosopher of nature buried in nature. Theories immediately spread about Rousseau's death. Some believe he was murdered, others suggest suicide. The paranoid suggest the conspiracy finally killed him. Most likely, he died of natural causes, an old man in poor health. But the circumstances allow speculation, and speculation continues for decades. In 1794, during the Revolution, Rousseau's remains are transferred to the Pantheon in Paris, the monument to great Frenchmen. Robespierre, who worships Rousseau, arranges this before his own execution. Rousseau is entombed alongside Voltaire, his great enemy. The irony would have pleased neither of them. Thérèse outlives Rousseau by nearly 20 years. She becomes a minor celebrity as the philosopher's widow. She tells stories about him to visitors, sometimes contradicting his confessions. She suggests he was impotent, that other men fathered the abandoned children, that his accounts of their relationship are false. Whether this is truth or revenge, we cannot know. The final years show the personal cost of Rousseau's philosophy and personality. He wanted to live naturally, authentically, independently. He ended isolated, paranoid, dependent on patrons he suspected. He wanted to be understood by society. He ended convinced society had conspired to destroy him. He wanted to preserve his authentic self against civilization's corruption. He ended fragmented, playing judge and accused in dialogues with himself. His death provokes different reactions. Admirers mourn the philosopher of freedom, persecuted by corrupt establishments. Critics note the self-inflicted nature of much suffering. Sympathetic observers see mental illness and feel pity. Harsh critics see narcissism and feel contempt. Everyone agrees his life was tragic, though they disagree about who or what was responsible for the tragedy. What remains after his death is the work: political philosophy that justifies revolution, educational theory that transforms childhood, autobiography that invents confessional literature, novels that inspire romanticism, writing about nature that anticipates environmentalism. The disturbed man is gone. The influential ideas remain. The music he copied in his final years, careful mechanical work to earn modest income, survives in archives. It is competent craftsmanship, nothing more. But it represents something important about Rousseau, his need to make something with his hands, to do simple work, to be useful in basic ways. Between the grandiose philosophical systems and the paranoid self-defenses was a man who found peace copying musical notes, one after another, building something small and complete. His final walks at Hermenonville, studying plants, looking at clouds, sitting by the lake. These were as close as he came to the state of nature he imagined. An old man alone with non-human nature, temporarily free from social relationships and their complications. Not the noble savage wandering forests, but a civilized man exhausted by civilization, finding brief rest before death. The last words we have from him are in letters from Hermenonville. He describes the beauty of the place. He expresses something like contentment. He does not complain about conspiracies. Perhaps at the very end he found a measure of the peace he sought throughout his life. Or perhaps he was simply too tired to maintain the paranoia. Either way, he died quietly. Away from the society he spent his life both needing and condemning. Watchmaker, 1778. Age of Enlightenment, 1789. 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 Age of Enlightenment Women, Sex, and Dangerous Passions, Rousseau's Gender Politics. Rousseau's views on women are contradictory and revealing. He writes about passionate love with intensity few philosophers match. He creates Julie, one of literature's most compelling female characters. He describes sexuality with unusual honesty for his era. Yet his prescriptions for women's education and social roles are deeply restrictive. Understanding this contradiction reveals something important about his philosophy and its consequences. Start with his personal relationships. His mother dies giving birth to him. This absence haunts him. Madame de Warrants becomes a substitute mother, then lover, collapsing the roles in ways that shape his psychology permanently. The confusion of maternal and sexual love, the longing for a woman who is both mother and partner, runs through all his relationships. Thérèse Levasseur is chosen precisely because she is not his intellectual equal. She cannot challenge him, cannot judge him by philosophical standards, cannot compete with him. He describes her as simple, honest, natural. What he means is that she is safely beneath him. With her, he maintains control. With educated women, he would have to navigate equality, and this he cannot do. The abandoned children reveal something darker. 5 times Thérèse becomes pregnant. 5 times Rousseau eliminates the child. A woman might resist this once, perhaps twice. That it happens 5 times suggests either Thérèse's complete powerlessness or her complicity. Either way, Rousseau treats reproduction as entirely his decision. The woman's body serves his needs, and he disposes of the consequences. His sexual peculiarities, confessed in detail, involve submission to women. He wants to be dominated, humiliated, even beaten. This seems contradictory. The philosopher of male authority wants to submit sexually, but it makes psychological sense. In the sexual realm, where control is relinquished consensually, he can safely experience powerlessness. Outside that realm, he must maintain dominance. The sexual submission is containment of vulnerability, not contradiction of authority. His great passion for Sophie de Haudetot reveals another pattern. She is unavailable, already committed to another man. The love is therefore impossible, which makes it safe for Rousseau. He can feel intensely without risking real intimacy. He can idealize her because the relationship remains fantasy. When women are safely distant, he can love them. When they are present and real, he cannot. Julie, or the New Eloise, is Rousseau's longest exploration of love and women. Julie is passionate, intelligent, morally serious. She loves Saint-Preux completely, but she obeys her father and marries Volmar. The novel treats this obedience as admirable. Julie subordinates her passionate will to paternal authority. This is virtue, Rousseau suggests, for women. After marriage, Julie becomes the perfect wife. She manages the household efficiently. She raises children dutifully. She sublimates her passion for Saint-Preux into domestic excellence and maternal devotion. The novel presents this as fulfillment, not tragedy. The passionate girl becomes the virtuous woman by accepting her proper role. But Saint-Preux never has to subordinate himself similarly. His passion remains pure because it requires no practical expression. He can love Julie eternally precisely because they cannot be together. The man preserves authentic feeling. The woman must transform feeling into duty. This asymmetry is not accidental but central to Rousseau's vision of gender relations. The prescriptions in Émile make this explicit. Book 5 describes Sophie's education. Where Émile learns independence, Sophie learns dependence. Where Émile develops reason, Sophie develops intuition and charm. Where Émile is educated to be free, Sophie is educated to be pleasing. The educational goals are opposed because men and women have opposed natures and purposes. Rousseau's argument is that sexual difference is natural and profound. Women are made for men. Their purpose is to be wives and mothers. Their education should fit this purpose. Teaching women philosophy, mathematics, or science makes them unnatural and unhappy. A learned woman is a monster, he suggests, because learning contradicts female nature. Sophie must learn domestic skills, sewing, cooking, managing servants, caring for children. She must learn to be attractive without being vain. She must develop intuition that lets her understand people emotionally. She must be modest, submissive, devoted. Her entire education aims at making her suitable for Émile. The asymmetry is total. Émile is educated to be autonomous. Sophie is educated to serve Émile's autonomy. Émile thinks for himself. Sophie intuits what Émile needs. Émile makes decisions. Sophie implements them cheerfully. The relationship is complementary, Rousseau argues, but the complement is clearly hierarchical. Women's reason is different from men's reason, Rousseau claims. Men reason abstractly about universal principles. Women reason practically about particular situations. Men understand justice and rights. Women understand feelings and relationships. This is not inferiority but difference, he insists. Women are perfectly rational within their proper sphere. But the proper sphere is the home. Women should not participate in public life, politics, philosophy, or science. These require abstract reason that women naturally lack. Women's influence should be private, domestic, moral. They shape men's character, raise children, maintain households. This is crucial work but inherently subordinate to public male activity. Rousseau's sexual politics connect to his general politics. In the social contract, citizens are equal, autonomous, participating directly in government. But these citizens are all male. Women are excluded from political life entirely. They have no share in sovereignty, no voice in the general will, no political rights. The egalitarian republic is a male republic. Why? Because women's nature fits them for private life, not public. Because women are emotional and particular, while politics requires abstract reasoning. Because women's role is bearing and raising future citizens, not being citizens themselves. The republic needs women to reproduce citizens, not to be citizens. This exclusion has consequences. If women are not citizens, they are outside the social contract. They do not consent to be governed. They are subject to laws they have no part in making. The universal equality Rousseau claims for humans applies only to males. Women are governed not by their own will, even collectively expressed, but by male will. The family is also structured hierarchically. The husband is head of household, making decisions, representing the family in public. The wife manages internal domestic matters, but under his authority. Children obey parents, meaning in practice the father. This is natural order, Rousseau argues, reflecting men's reason and women's intuition. Sexual morality is different for men and women. Women must be strictly chaste before marriage and absolutely faithful after. Any sexual activity outside marriage destroys a woman's honor irreparably. But men are allowed more latitude. Male infidelity is not ideal but not catastrophic. This double standard is necessary, Rousseau argues, because paternity must be certain, but maternity always is. The argument is practical, not moral. If women were sexually free, men could not know which children were theirs. This would destroy family structure. Therefore, women's sexuality must be controlled strictly. Men's sexuality need not be controlled as strictly because it does not threaten the same uncertainty. Women's subordination follows from reproductive biology. This argument will be used for centuries to justify restricting women's freedom. Women's bodies can become pregnant, therefore women must be controlled. The biological fact becomes justification for social domination. Rousseau does not invent this logic, but he gives it philosophical respectability through his emphasis on nature. His influence on gender politics is enormous and almost entirely negative. Every 19th century opponent of women's education quotes Rousseau. Every argument against women's suffrage cites natural differences Rousseau elaborates. Every defense of separate spheres invokes Rousseauian nature. He provides intellectual foundation for excluding women from public life. Mary Wollstonecraft writes A Vindication of the Rights of Woman in 1792 as direct response to Rousseau. She demolishes his argument systematically. Women appear different because they are educated differently. Give women the same education as men, and the supposed natural differences disappear. Rousseau's nature is actually custom and artificial constraint. But Wollstonecraft's critique, though devastating, does not dislodge Rousseau's influence. The 19th century embraces his gender politics even while implementing his political radicalism. Revolutionaries who read The Social Contract also read Émile. They fight for male equality while insisting on female subordination. The contradiction does not trouble them because Rousseau naturalizes it. The Romantic movement, influenced by Rousseau's cult of feeling, produces two opposed effects on women. Positively, it allows women writers to claim authority through emotional authenticity. If feeling is what matters, women have equal or superior access to it. Female novelists, poets, and essayists build careers on romantic emphasis on emotion and sensibility. Negatively, it reinforces women's confinement to private sphere. If women are naturally emotional and men naturally rational, then public life requiring reason should be male. Women can write novels and poems expressing feeling, but should not engage philosophy, science, or politics. The romantic cult of female emotion becomes another form of exclusion. Rousseau's personal relationships reveal the practical effects of his theories. He cannot relate to women as equals. With Madame de Warrants, he is the dependent child. With Thérèse, he is the dominant master. With Sophie Daudetot, he is the distant worshipper. He never achieves relationship between equals because his philosophy makes equality impossible. The abandoned children represent the ultimate expression of his gender politics. The children are products of Thérèse's body, but Rousseau treats them as entirely his to dispose of. No discussion, no joint decision, just his will imposed. She exists to serve his needs, including sexual needs, but the consequences are his to manage as he sees fit. Her will, her feelings, her motherhood are irrelevant. This is not exceptional cruelty for the 18th century. Many men treated women similarly, but Rousseau is writing philosophy about human equality, natural rights, and authentic feeling. The gap between his stated principles and his treatment of actual women reveals the limits of his egalitarianism. Equality applies to male citizens. Everyone else exists to serve them. The ideology he creates enables this. Nature becomes the justification. Women are naturally different, naturally subordinate, naturally domestic. Therefore, their exclusion from equality is not injustice, but recognition of nature. Any woman who resists is unnatural, a monster, corrupted by bad education. The system is closed, self-justifying, resistant to critique. Later feminists have to fight against Rousseau's influence for generations. Every argument for women's education must counter his claim that education masculinizes women. Every demand for political rights must counter his argument that politics is naturally male. Every assertion of women's reason must counter his limitation of female intelligence to intuition and particular judgments. Rousseau's sexual politics also enable conservative reaction against revolutionary equality. After the French Revolution, when Europe pulls back from radical egalitarianism, gender hierarchy provides fallback position. Maybe political equality was too radical, but certainly gender difference is natural. Women should return to traditional roles. The family remains hierarchical even if society becomes more equal. The 19th century creates cult of domesticity influenced by Rousseau. The home is woman's proper sphere. She is angel in the house, moral guardian, nurturer. She has power, but only private, informal, moral power. She shapes sons who become citizens and husbands who participate in public life. She remains behind the scenes, influential but subordinate. This ideology restricts women massively while claiming to honor them. You are not inferior, women are told, just different. Your work is crucial, just private. You have power, just not authority. You are honored, just not equal. It is sophisticated subordination, and Rousseau provides much of its philosophical foundation. His influence persists into the 20th century. When women fight for suffrage, opponents quote Rousseau on natural differences. When women demand access to universities, opponents cite natural intellectual limitations. When women seek independence, traditionalists invoke natural destiny of motherhood. The arguments evolve but trace back to Rousseau's naturalizing of gender hierarchy. Even his sexual peculiarities have consequences. His confessions about masochism, humiliation, submission make these aspects of sexuality discussable. This is liberating in some ways, allowing more honest understanding of sexual diversity. But it also connects male submission to shame, treating it as weakness or perversion rather than one valid way of experiencing sexuality. Rousseau's gender politics are the part of his philosophy least defensible today. We can debate whether the general will makes sense, whether property is theft, whether civilization corrupts. But the claim that women are naturally subordinate, fit only for domestic life, lacking capacity for abstract reason, this is simply wrong, disproven by generations of women's achievements in every field Rousseau declared beyond female capacity. Yet his influence shaped European and American gender relations for centuries. The separate spheres ideology, the domesticity cult, the exclusion of women from public life, the restrictions on women's education, all bear his mark. Millions of women lived more constrained lives because his ideas made female subordination seem natural and necessary. This is part of his legacy, alongside the political philosophy and romantic sensibility, the totalitarian legacy. The 20th century reveals Rousseau's philosophy's darkest potential. The French Revolution's terror killed tens of thousands. The 20th century totalitarian regimes killed tens of millions. Not all of this is Rousseau's fault, but the intellectual structures enabling it trace back to concepts he created. Understanding this connection requires examining how his ideas appear in the century's most murderous ideologies. Vladimir Lenin reads Rousseau. Russian revolutionaries are influenced by French Revolution, which means by Rousseau. The Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 establishes a regime explicitly based on representing the people's true interests against their expressed preferences. The party knows what the proletariat really needs, even when workers themselves disagree. This is Rousseau's general will updated. The party represents the proletariat's objective interests, their true will as a class. Individual workers may have false consciousness, bourgeois ideas, reactionary attitudes. They may want things contrary to their interests. The party must guide them, educate them, if necessary, force them to act in their own interest. Lenin's What is to be done articulates this explicitly. Workers left to themselves develop only trade union consciousness, seeking higher wages and better conditions within capitalism. Revolutionary consciousness must be brought from outside by the party's intellectuals. Workers cannot spontaneously understand their true interests. They must be led. This is forcing people to be free. Workers think they want reforms within capitalism. Actually, they want revolution, communism, elimination of exploitation. They do not know this yet, but the party knows it for them. When the party acts against workers' expressed wishes, it acts for their true wishes. Compulsion is service. The dictatorship of the proletariat is Rousseauian popular sovereignty. The proletariat is sovereign. The party represents the proletariat. Therefore, the party is sovereign. Opposition to the party is opposition to the proletariat, opposition to the people, opposition to history itself. Such opposition cannot be legitimate disagreement, but only error or malice. Stalin takes this further. The party has established socialism in Soviet Union. Anyone who opposes this opposes the people's will. Anyone who criticizes is an enemy of the people. The purges of the 1930s follow Rousseauian logic. Eliminate those who resist the general will. The millions sent to gulags, executed, starved, are enemies not of Stalin personally, but of history, progress, the people. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. Estimates for deaths under Stalin range from 7 to 20 million. Famines deliberately caused or exacerbated, purges targeting class enemies, ethnic groups, party members suspected of deviation. The Great Terror of 1936 to 1938 alone kills approximately 700,000, all justified as defense of socialism, which means defense of the people's true interests. Chinese communism follows similar patterns. Mao reads Soviet theory, which is influenced by French revolutionary thought, which comes from Rousseau. The Communist Party represents the people. Opposition to the party is counter-revolutionary. Class enemies must be eliminated. The people must be transformed into proper socialist citizens through education and, when necessary, force. The Great Leap Forward in 1958 to 1962 causes famine, killing 15 to 55 million people. Estimates vary wildly because records were destroyed. Mao's policies caused the famine, but reporting this is counter-revolutionary. To say people are starving is to criticize the party, which means criticizing the people, which is treason. Loyalty requires affirming success even while millions starve. The Cultural Revolution of 1966 to 1976 aims at transforming human nature itself. Create new socialist man by destroying old culture, old habits, old ideas, old customs. This is Rousseau's project of creating virtuous citizens who naturally will the common good. Use education, propaganda, struggle sessions, forced labor, violence to transform consciousness. Intellectuals are particular targets because education is corrupting in Rousseau's system. The Red Guards, young revolutionaries mobilized by Mao, attack teachers, professors, anyone with education. Universities close, books are burned. Knowledge itself is suspect because it comes from old society. Simplicity and ideological purity matter more than learning. An estimated 500,000 to 2 million died during the Cultural Revolution. Many more are persecuted, sent to countryside for re-education, have careers destroyed. The goal is transforming human nature, creating people who think correctly. Those who cannot be transformed must be eliminated. This is forcing people to be free. Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia take Rousseauian primitivism to its ultimate expression. Pol Pot studies in Paris, reads French revolutionary thought. He returns to Cambodia with vision of return to natural simplicity. Empty the cities, destroy education, eliminate intellectuals, create agrarian communist society of simple peasants. In April 1975, the Khmer Rouge captures Phnom Penh. They immediately evacuate the entire city. Millions of people are forced to countryside. Hospitals are emptied, patients dying on the roads. The cities must be destroyed because they are corrupt, artificial, the opposite of natural rural life. This is literal application of Rousseau's critique of civilization. The Khmer Rouge declares year zero. Everything before the revolution is erased. History begins now. Money is abolished. Schools closed. Temples destroyed. Families separated. Everyone must work in agricultural communes, growing rice, living simply. This is the state of nature attempted in modern world. Return to primitive simplicity through revolutionary force. Intellectuals are killed systematically. Wearing glasses is evidence of education, enough for execution. Speaking foreign languages means corruption by outside. Any education beyond basic literacy is dangerous. The revolution requires simple people who work without thinking, without questioning. An estimated 1.5 to 2 million Cambodians die between 1975 and 1979, roughly 25% of the population. The Khmer Rouge explicitly invoke natural simplicity. Life should be like primitive times before cities, before technology, before complicated social structures. Work in fields, eat simply, sleep in collective huts. No privacy, no family bonds, no individual aspirations. The collective is everything, the individual nothing. This is Rousseau's state of nature twisted into genocide. What connects these horrors to Rousseau? Not direct causation. He did not advocate mass murder, but he created intellectual tools that enable it. The idea that there is one correct understanding of the people's interests. The idea that dissent means false consciousness or malice. The idea that force is justified to align individuals with collective good. The idea that simplicity is superior to complexity. That education corrupts, that civilization is disease. Every totalitarian ideology claims to represent the people against elites. Every totalitarian party claims to know the people's true interests better than the people themselves. Every totalitarian state claims that opposition is not legitimate disagreement but treason. Every totalitarian campaign of terror claims to be defensive, protecting the people from enemies. These claims are possible because Rousseau made them intellectually respectable. Before him, authoritarian rulers claimed divine right or traditional authority. After him, they can claim popular sovereignty. The people are sovereign, the state represents the people, therefore the state is popular sovereignty in action. Opposing the state means opposing the people themselves. The concept of forcing people to be free enables every re-education camp, every thought reform session, every struggle session. You have false consciousness. We will correct it. We do this for your own good. Your current self resists, but your true self wants transformation. We force you to become who you really are. Compulsion is liberation. The civil religion becomes ideological orthodoxy. You must believe in communism or fascism or whatever the state ideology is. Not just obey, but believe. Your thoughts must be correct. Doubt is treason. Questions are counter-revolutionary. The state reaches into consciousness itself, demanding not just obedience but faith. The numbers are staggering. Soviet Union, 7 to 20 million dead. China, 40 to 80 million dead from all of Mao's campaigns. Cambodia, 1.5 to 2 million dead. These are only the largest examples. Add smaller communist regimes, add fascist states, add all the 20th century governments claiming to represent the people's will while killing the people. The total reaches 100 million dead or more. Not all totalitarian ideology comes from Rousseau. Fascism draws on different sources: nationalism, racial theory, cult of violence. But even fascism uses Rousseauian concepts. The nation as unified will, the leader embodying the people, the subordination of individual to collective, the elimination of class conflict by creating organic unity. These are totalitarian adaptations of Rousseau's ideas. The common pattern is replacing individual judgment with collective judgment, then placing collective judgment beyond question. Rousseau does this by making the general will definitionally correct. Totalitarians do it by making the party or leader or ideology the infallible expression of popular will. The mechanism is the same. Create unchallengeable authority claiming to represent the people. Liberal democracy rejects this. It assumes people can legitimately disagree. It protects dissent. It allows opposition. It limits government through constitutional structures. It recognizes that there is no such thing as the general will, only competing interests that must be negotiated. It is messy, inefficient, frustrating. It also does not produce genocides. The totalitarian disasters of the 20th century vindicate liberalism's modesty. Trying to create perfect societies based on correct understanding of the people's true interests kills millions. Accepting that societies will be imperfect, that people disagree, that politics is about compromise, not perfection, this keeps the death toll lower. Rousseau would have been horrified by Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot. He imagined small, peaceful republics, not industrialized terror states. But horror at consequences does not eliminate responsibility for concepts that enable consequences. Rousseau gave totalitarians the vocabulary, the logic, the justification. They took his ideas and ran them to their logical conclusions. Some argue this is unfair, that any philosophy can be misused. True, but not all philosophies are equally dangerous when misused. Liberal ideas misused might produce inefficiency or gridlock. Rousseau's ideas misused produce camps and killing fields. The difference matters. The question is whether there is a way to salvage the valuable parts of Rousseau's thought while rejecting the dangerous parts. Can we keep his critique of inequality without the general will? Can we keep his emphasis on popular sovereignty without forcing people to be free? Can we keep his love of nature without primitivism? Can we keep his egalitarianism without totalitarianism? Perhaps. But it requires explicit rejection of his most characteristic concepts. The general will must go. Popular sovereignty must be limited by individual rights. Natural simplicity must not become political program. Authenticity must not override pluralism. Basically, we must read Rousseau critically, taking insights while rejecting his system. The 20th century's lesson is that Rousseau's system, implemented, kills. Not sometimes or accidentally, but reliably. When regimes try to create unified popular will, they kill those who do not fit. When they try to force people to be free, they create gulags. When they try to return to simplicity, they empty cities and starve millions. The pattern is consistent. This does not make Rousseau history's most dangerous thinker in some simple causal sense. Ideas do not implement themselves. Humans make choices. Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot made evil choices. They bear moral responsibility. But Rousseau provided the intellectual framework that made their choices seem principled rather than simply criminal. He made terror look like virtue. That is his legacy and his crime. Mzavershai, the democracy paradox, Rousseau's contradictions, analysis. Rousseau presents himself as philosopher of freedom and democracy. He argues for popular sovereignty against arbitrary power, for human equality. Yet his concepts enable tyranny as much as liberty. Understanding this paradox requires examining the fundamental contradictions in his thought and why they persist unresolved. The central contradiction. Rousseau claims to maximize freedom while creating concepts that justify total control. Citizens in his legitimate society surrender all rights completely to the community. They obey the general will in everything. They accept civil religion. They subordinate private interests entirely. Yet Rousseau insists this is perfect freedom because they are obeying themselves collectively. The trick is identifying individual will with collective will. You are free when you do what the community decides because you are part of the community. Your particular will and the general will are somehow the same. But this is obviously false. Your will and the collective will diverge constantly. When they diverge, Rousseau chooses collective over individual every time. The freedom he promises becomes indistinguishable from submission. Another contradiction. Rousseau values authenticity, yet prescribes extensive control over citizens. Authentic self is natural, spontaneous, true to inner nature. But citizens in Rousseau's Republic must be carefully educated, shaped by legislators, forced to be virtuous. They must accept civil religion, subordinate private interests, will the common good. This is not authenticity, but indoctrination. Rousseau never resolves this. He wants natural virtue, but knows it requires artificial cultivation. He wants spontaneous goodness, but knows it must be taught and enforced. He wants authentic selves, but needs citizens who all think correctly. The authentic and the controlled cannot be reconciled, so Rousseau simply asserts they are identical. Third contradiction, Rousseau critiques civilization while living entirely within it. He argues that property is theft, arts corrupt, sciences harm morals, social life destroys freedom. Yet he is a writer, dependent on publishers and readers. He lives in cities, accepts patronage from aristocrats, participates in intellectual culture. He uses civilization's tools to attack civilization. He attempts to live according to his principles by wearing simple clothes, refusing dinners, copying music rather than accepting prestigious positions. But these are gestures, not genuine withdrawal. He never actually leaves civilization. He never attempts to live as natural man. He critiques from within what he claims to reject. This is not simple hypocrisy. It reveals deeper problem. Rousseau's ideal is impossible. Humans cannot return to state of nature. Civilization cannot be undone. The critique has nowhere to stand. It can only be performed within the system it condemns, making it ultimately impotent or self-undermining. Fourth contradiction. Rousseau proclaims universal equality while excluding women, justifying slavery in certain circumstances, accepting hierarchy in families. His egalitarianism is limited to male citizens of small republics. Everyone else exists outside the circle of equality. The universal principles turn out to be particular and restricted. He never acknowledges this as contradiction. Women are naturally different, so excluding them from equality is not inequality, but recognition of nature. Families require hierarchy for practical reasons. Some forms of domination are legitimate because they reflect natural differences. The equality is universal only within artificially restricted categories. Fifth contradiction. Rousseau values community and belonging yet is incapable of sustaining relationships. He breaks with friends, quarrels with patrons, sees conspiracies everywhere. The philosopher of social unity cannot function in actual society. The theorist of the general will cannot align his particular will with anyone else's. This suggests his philosophy is compensation, projection of what he cannot achieve in life. He describes perfect community because he has never experienced it. He imagines unified general will because his own will is constantly in conflict with others. The philosophy is wish fulfillment disguised as political theory. Sixth contradiction. Rousseau claims the general will is democratic yet makes it unchallengeable. Citizens vote to discover the general will, but the general will is always right regardless of the vote. If citizens vote wrongly, that is not the general will. If they disagree with what is declared the general will, they are mistaken. Democracy becomes whatever the authority claims it is. This opens door to tyranny disguised as democracy. Any ruler can claim to represent the general will. Any policy can be declared the people's true interest. Any opposition can be dismissed as error. The democratic forms remain, but the content is authoritarian. This is not accidental flaw, but logical consequence of Rousseau's concepts. Seventh contradiction. Rousseau wants transparency and authenticity, yet his own life is filled with deception and hidden acts. He abandons children secretly. He uses false names while fleeing. He reveals some shames in confessions while hiding others. He accuses everyone of conspiracy while himself manipulating situations. The philosopher of transparency is opaque. Again, this is not simple hypocrisy but revealing contradiction. Total transparency is impossible without destroying social life. Some privacy, some discretion, some performance are necessary. Rousseau's demand for absolute authenticity is unrealistic, and his inability to meet it himself proves this. Eighth contradiction. Rousseau values simplicity, yet writes complex, sophisticated philosophy. He praises ignorance over learning, yet is himself learned. He celebrates simple peasants, yet is urban intellectual. He wants to reduce humans to natural simplicity, yet produces elaborate arguments requiring significant education to understand. The philosophy undermines itself. If simplicity is superior, why write philosophy at all? If ignorance is better than knowledge, why should anyone read Rousseau? If natural man is happiest, why become philosopher? Rousseau has no answer except to be simple in your own way, which means the simplicity is not really simple. These contradictions are not peripheral but central. They are not failures of Rousseau's execution but problems with his project. He wants to combine incompatible things: perfect freedom and perfect unity, authenticity and control, nature and civilization, equality and hierarchy, democracy and infallibility. When contradictions cannot be resolved, Rousseau uses verbal tricks. Freedom is obedience. Nature requires cultivation. Equality means hierarchy in some relationships. Democracy means the people's true interests, not their expressed preferences. The words stay but meanings shift until they mean their opposites. This makes Rousseau simultaneously inspiring and dangerous. Inspiring because he articulates genuine problems. Inequality is unjust, civilization is alienating, authenticity matters, freedom is valuable. Dangerous because his solutions to these problems are worse than the problems. Eliminating inequality through total state control, escaping alienation through forced unity, achieving authenticity through indoctrination, securing freedom through compulsion. The paradox is that readers take different parts. Democrats emphasize popular sovereignty while ignoring forcing people to be free. Authoritarians emphasize general will while ignoring individual rights. Romantics emphasize authenticity while ignoring political control. Revolutionaries emphasize critique of existing order while ignoring impossibility of proposed alternatives. Everyone finds something useful in Rousseau because the contradictions allow selective reading. You can make him support almost any position by emphasizing some texts and ignoring others. This makes him perpetually relevant but also perpetually misunderstood. No one interpretation captures him fully because he is genuinely incoherent. Perhaps the contradictions are the point. Perhaps Rousseau is not proposing a system but expressing tensions inherent in modern life. We want freedom and community. We want authenticity and acceptance. We want equality and excellence. We want nature and civilization. These desires conflict, and Rousseau exposes the conflicts rather than resolving them. This interpretation is too generous. Rousseau does not just express tensions but claims to resolve them. He offers the social contract as solution, the general will as answer, legitimate society as possibility. He is not just diagnosing but prescribing, and the prescriptions, when followed, produce disasters. The democracy paradox is that Rousseau's concepts meant to secure democracy enable its opposite. Popular sovereignty becomes tyranny of those claiming to represent the people. Freedom becomes forced conformity. Equality becomes elimination of anyone different. Community becomes totalitarian unity. The path from Rousseau's ideals to 20th century horrors is direct. Why does this happen? Because Rousseau refuses to accept the messiness of real democracy. Real democracy means people disagree. Laws are compromises, not expressions of unified will. Rights protect minorities from majorities. Institutions check power because humans are imperfect. Democracy is conflict managed, not harmony achieved. Rousseau rejects all of this. He wants perfect democracy where everyone wills the same thing, where freedom and authority coincide, where force is unnecessary because everyone naturally agrees. This perfect democracy is indistinguishable from perfect tyranny because both require eliminating disagreement. The lesson is that contradictions in political philosophy matter. They are not just academic problems, but sources of real-world danger. Rousseau's contradictions allow totalitarians to claim democratic legitimacy while destroying democracy. They allow revolutionaries to claim to liberate while enslaving. They allow terror to present itself as virtue. Understanding Rousseau requires understanding the contradictions not as puzzles to solve, but as warnings. When someone promises perfect freedom through total submission, be suspicious. When someone claims unified popular will transcends individual rights, resist. When someone says we must destroy civilization to be natural, refuse. Rousseau's contradictions teach what not to do. Modern echoes. Rousseau in the 21st century. 2.5 centuries after Rousseau's death, his ideas persist in unexpected forms. The specifics change, but the patterns remain. Authenticity versus performance, nature versus civilization, individual versus collective, freedom versus belonging. Contemporary debates echo Rousseauian themes, often without recognizing their source. Understanding this helps explain current political and cultural conflicts. Identity politics carries Rousseauian DNA. The emphasis on authentic self, on being true to inner identity, on refusing to perform for others. This is Rousseau's authenticity imperative. The demand that society recognize and validate one's true self, that institutions accommodate rather than asking individuals to adapt. This assumes Rousseau's framework where society should serve natural selves rather than shaping them. The positive version, people should not have to hide fundamental aspects of identity. Society should be inclusive enough that everyone can be themselves. This is humane and correct. The Rousseauian version, any expectation to modify behavior for social context is oppression. Any distinction between public and private selves is inauthenticity. Any performance is betrayal of true self. This makes all social life oppressive because all social life requires some performance, some adjustment to context, some distinction between what we feel and what we express. Rousseau's absolute authenticity is unlivable standard that makes normal social navigation look like betrayal. Contemporary identity politics sometimes inherits this impossible demand. The concept of microaggressions reflects Rousseauian hypersensitivity. Every slight is evidence of deeper hostility. Every misunderstanding is malicious. Everyone is either ally or enemy. This is Rousseau's paranoia universalized into social theory. What if his sense of persecution was not individual pathology, but accurate perception of how society treats authentic selves? Then everyone has reason for suspicion. Environmental movements channel Rousseauian nature worship. The wilderness must be preserved from human civilization. Natural is better than artificial. Technology corrupts. Simple living is superior to modern complexity. We must return to harmony with nature that civilization destroyed. This is Rousseau's state of nature updated for ecological consciousness. The positive version, environmental destruction is real and urgent. We must change practices that harm ecosystems. Sustainability matters. The Rousseauian version, civilization itself is the problem. Progress is decline. The solution is returning to simpler ways of living. Humans are cancer on natural world. This leads to primitivism that is neither possible nor desirable. We cannot return to pre-industrial life. Most humans would die. Those surviving would live shorter, harder, more painful lives. The romanticization of primitive life ignores its realities: high infant mortality, endemic disease, limited options, violent conflict. Rousseau's nature is fantasy, and pursuing it produces either empty gestures or catastrophic policies. Critiques of technology and social media use Rousseauian frameworks. These technologies are unnatural, artificial, alienating. They separate us from authentic experience and direct connection. They create false selves and superficial relationships. We should disconnect, return to face-to-face interaction, recover presence and attention that technology destroys. There is truth here. Social media can be toxic. Constant connectivity creates problems, but the solution is not rejecting technology entirely but using it better. The Rousseauian impulse to see all artificial creations as corrupting prevents this nuanced approach. Technology is not inherently bad any more than civilization is inherently bad. Both can be done well or badly. Educational debates repeat Rousseauian themes. Child-centered learning that follows students' natural interests. This is Émile. Protecting children from adult knowledge and corruption. This is negative education. Emphasis on experience over books, process over content, feeling over information. All Rousseau. Progressive education has Rousseauian foundations. This produces some good practices: attention to developmental stages, hands-on learning, respecting children as persons. But it also produces problems. reluctance to challenge students, emphasis on self-esteem over achievement, assumption that structure corrupts natural learning. The fantasy that children naturally want to learn and will do so spontaneously if not interfered with. This is Rousseauian optimism about natural goodness. Reality is more complex. Children need guidance, structure, sometimes compulsion. Good education balances child's nature with society's needs. Rousseau's pure child-centeredness cannot work. Communitarianism revives Rousseauian critique of individualism. Liberal societies are too focused on individual rights, critics argue. They destroy communities, leave people isolated and alienated. We need to rebuild civic virtue, shared values, common good. Rights must be balanced with responsibilities. Individual must be re-embedded in community. The positive version, extreme individualism, is lonely and unsustainable. Communities matter. Shared purposes create meaning. Some goods can only be achieved collectively. The Rousseauian version, individual must be subordinated to collective. Rights are selfish. Community will must override individual preferences. Unity must be achieved even through force. This slides toward Rousseau's totalitarian potential. Who defines community values? Who enforces them? What happens to those who disagree? Communitarianism without strong individual rights protection becomes oppressive. The general will returns, now called community standards or shared values. Populism across political spectrum echoes Rousseau's people versus elites framework. The people are virtuous, authentic, betrayed by corrupt elites. The elite are artificial, disconnected, serving their own interests. Politics must return power to the people. The people's will must prevail over expert opinion and institutional procedures. Right-wing populism says people's will is national sovereignty, traditional values, cultural preservation. Left-wing populism says people's will is economic equality, social justice, redistribution, different content but same structure. Unified people with clear will versus corrupt elites standing in the way. This is Rousseau's framework. It assumes the people have unified will rather than competing interests. It makes disagreement into betrayal or manipulation by elites. It delegitimizes institutions that mediate conflict. It creates binary of authentic people versus corrupt establishment. This is dangerous regardless of political orientation. The rhetoric of forcing people to be free appears in campaigns against false consciousness. People vote against their interests because of racism, sexism, capitalism, media manipulation. They must be educated to understand their true interests. Their current preferences are inauthentic, products of oppression. Enlightened activists must guide them to correct consciousness. This is profoundly anti-democratic while claiming democratic legitimacy. It says people's expressed preferences don't count if they are wrong preferences. Experts know better than people themselves what people really want. This is exactly Rousseau's logic applied to contemporary politics. Social media creates new forms of Rousseauian authenticity performance. People perform authenticity by sharing intimate details, expressing strong emotions, rejecting polish and curation. The performance is exhausting. You must constantly prove you are real, genuine, not artificial. But the constant performance of authenticity is itself artifice. This is Rousseau's problem universalized. He performed authenticity through confessions, through wearing simple clothes, through breaking with corrupt philosophe. But the performance proved he was not actually authentic, just performing authenticity differently. Contemporary social media users face the same bind. Proving authenticity requires performance, but performance undermines authenticity. Cancel culture reflects Rousseauian civil religion. Certain beliefs are required. Dissent is not permitted. Those who violate orthodoxy must be expelled from community. This is Rousseau's banishment of those who reject civil religion or act against it. The content is different but structure identical. Enforce correct belief through exclusion. The justification is also Rousseauian. Unity requires shared values. Those who reject shared values threaten community. Therefore, they must go. This logic makes pluralism impossible. It creates ideologically homogeneous spaces where everyone thinks alike or pretends to. Rousseau's Republic of Virtue returns as online communities policing members' beliefs. Critics of liberal democracy use Rousseauian arguments. Liberalism is too individualistic, too focused on rights, too procedural. It cannot create meaningful community or shared purposes. It is hollow, alienating, ultimately unsustainable. We need thicker forms of solidarity, stronger conceptions of good, more robust community. Some of this is valid critique. Liberalism has limitations. But the alternatives tend toward Rousseauian dangers. Thick solidarity means enforcing conformity. Strong conceptions of good mean imposing values. Robust community means excluding those who don't fit. The cure is worse than disease. What should we take from Rousseau today? not his solutions, which remain dangerous. But perhaps his diagnosis of certain problems retains value. Inequality is a real problem requiring attention. Authenticity matters even if absolute authenticity is impossible. Nature deserves respect even if we cannot return to state of nature. Community is valuable even if it must be balanced with individual rights. The lesson is to take Rousseau's concerns seriously while rejecting his answers. Yes, modern life is often alienating. No, the solution is not eliminating civilization. Yes, inequality is unjust. No, the solution is not total state control. Yes, authenticity is valuable. No, we cannot live without any performance. Yes, community matters. No, it should not override individual rights. Rousseau teaches what happens when you push concerns to extremes, when you refuse compromise, when you demand perfect solutions. He shows dangers of utopianism, perfectionism, binary thinking. He shows why moderation, pluralism, tolerance of imperfection matter even though they seem like unprincipled compromise. Contemporary relevance is not that Rousseau was right, but that we keep making his mistakes. We keep demanding authenticity while living in society requiring performance. We keep wanting community while valuing autonomy. We keep criticizing civilization while depending on it. We keep seeking unified will while actually disagreeing. These tensions are permanent features of modern life. Rousseau's error was thinking these tensions could be resolved through proper political arrangements. They cannot. They must be managed, negotiated, balanced case by case. There is no system that makes freedom and order coincide perfectly, no arrangement that satisfies both individual and collective completely, no solution that reconciles nature and civilization entirely. Accepting this requires abandoning Rousseauian ambitions. Accept that politics is messy, accept that people legitimately disagree, accept that societies will always be imperfect, accept that some problems cannot be solved, only managed, accept that compromise is not betrayal, but wisdom. This modesty is what Rousseau could never accept and what his continuing influence makes difficult for us to accept. His ghost haunts modern politics because we keep trying to achieve what he promised. Perfect freedom, perfect equality, perfect community. And we keep failing because these perfections are incompatible and impossible. Learning from Rousseau means not repeating his mistakes. That means giving up on perfection and accepting difficult realities of pluralism, conflict, imperfection, and inevitable tension between valuable goods that cannot all be maximized simultaneously. The final verdict, Rousseau's complex legacy. On a summer evening in 1778, an old man collapses in a cottage at Hermenonville. By afternoon, he is dead. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, 66 years old, leaves behind a scattered collection of published works, unpublished manuscripts, and a Europe that has not yet fully understood what his ideas will mean. He could not have imagined what was coming. 11 years after his death, the Bastille falls. The revolutionaries carry his books, they quote his phrases, they attempt to build what he described. Within 5 years, the terror begins. Within 15 years, tens of thousands are dead. His vision of legitimate society, put into practice, becomes nightmare. But this is only part of the story. Rousseau was many things, and his influence flows in multiple directions, some destructive, some generative, most ambiguous. Start with what he got right. Inequality is a problem. He saw this when most intellectuals accepted hierarchy as natural and inevitable. He recognized that poverty and wealth, power and subjection, are not ordained by nature or God, but created by human arrangements. This insight alone makes him important. Before Rousseau, inequality was mostly invisible as inequality. After him, it requires justification. His critique of property opened questions that remain urgent. Who has the right to own what? How much inequality can legitimate society tolerate? When does private ownership harm common good? These are not answered by Rousseau, but he made them central to political philosophy. Marx builds on Rousseau's foundation, as do all later theorists of economic justice. His understanding of alienation is profound. Modern life separates us from our own experience. We live through others' eyes. We judge ourselves by external standards. We perform rather than simply being. This analysis captures something real about civilized existence. The Romantics, existentialists, and critics of consumer capitalism all echo Rousseau's diagnosis of modern alienation. His educational insights transformed how we think about childhood. Children are not defective adults, but beings with their own developmental logic. Education should follow natural stages, not force premature sophistication. Learning happens through experience, not just instruction. These principles, now standard in progressive education, were radical when Rousseau proposed them. His emphasis on authenticity, however problematic in application, addresses genuine human need. We want to be ourselves, not just play assigned roles. We seek genuine expression, not just acceptable performance. The difficulty of achieving this, the perhaps impossibility of complete authenticity in social life, does not make the desire illegitimate. Rousseau articulated something important, even if his solution was unworkable. His nature writing influences environmental consciousness. The idea that wilderness has intrinsic value, that natural world is not just resource for human exploitation, that we lose something important when we destroy ecosystems. These are now common, but were not always. Rousseau's celebration of nature helped create modern environmental awareness. His autobiographical writing pioneered new forms of self-examination. The Confessions, whatever its self-deceptions, attempts unprecedented honesty about interior life. It makes the self, with all its contradictions and shames, legitimate subject of literature. Every memoir since owes something to Rousseau's willingness to reveal what others concealed. These are real achievements. They make Rousseau important, influential, worth studying. They explain why he is read and discussed centuries after his death, but they coexist with darker legacy. His political concepts enabled totalitarianism. Not alone, not inevitably, but significantly. The general will, forcing people to be free, the subordination of individual to collective, the enforcement of civil religion. These ideas, when implemented by revolutionaries believing they served the people's true interests, produced systematic violence. Robespierre read Rousseau. Lenin read Rousseau. Mao studied French revolutionary theory descended from Rousseau. Pol Pot learned Rousseauian primitivism in Paris. The body count is real. The French Revolution's terror killed 40,000. Soviet communism killed millions. Chinese communism killed tens of millions. The Khmer Rouge killed a quarter of Cambodia's population. Not all of this is Rousseau's fault, but the intellectual structures justifying it trace back to concepts he created. Does this make him history's most dangerous thinker? The question assumes ideas have simple causal power. They do not. History is complex. Multiple factors produce events. Rousseau's ideas were necessary for certain developments, but not sufficient. Other thinkers contributed. Circumstances mattered. Human choices determined outcomes. But ideas do matter. They shape what seems possible, legitimate, justifiable. Before Rousseau, tyranny was tyranny. After Rousseau, tyranny could present itself as democracy, as the people's will, as forcing people to be free. He gave totalitarianism its democratic disguise. That is significant responsibility. His influence is contradictory because his thought is contradictory. He values freedom and creates concepts enabling oppression. He celebrates equality and justifies hierarchy in gender relations. He praises nature and lives entirely in civilization. He demands authenticity and performs constantly. He wants community and destroys relationships. He seeks truth and constructs elaborate self-justifications. These contradictions are not accidental but central. Rousseau attempts to reconcile things that cannot be reconciled: perfect freedom and perfect order, individual autonomy and collective unity, natural simplicity and civilized complexity, authentic self and socialized being. When reconciliation fails, he uses verbal formulas to make problems disappear. But problems do not disappear. They return with violence when his followers attempt to implement impossible solutions. His personal life reveals the human cost of his philosophy: the abandoned children, the broken friendships, the paranoid isolation, the inability to live by his own principles. These are not just personal failings, but symptoms of intellectual problems. When philosophy makes ordinary human life impossible, perhaps the philosophy is wrong. Yet people keep reading him, keep being influenced, keep trying to salvage insights while avoiding dangers. This persistence suggests Rousseau addresses permanent human concerns. We will always struggle with inequality, alienation, authenticity, the tension between individual and community. He does not solve these problems, but he articulates them powerfully. The question is not whether to read Rousseau, but how. Read him critically, recognizing seductions and resisting them. Take seriously his diagnosis of inequality without accepting his political solutions. Appreciate his nature writing without embracing primitivism. Value his emphasis on authenticity without demanding impossible transparency. Learn from his educational insights without rejecting necessary structure and discipline. Most importantly, learn from his errors. When someone promises perfect freedom through total submission, refuse. When someone claims to know the people's true interests better than the people themselves, resist. When someone says we must destroy civilization to be natural, reject it. When someone insists unity requires eliminating dissent, oppose them. These are Rousseau's paths to catastrophe, and knowing them helps avoid repeating them. His legacy is paradoxical because he himself was paradoxical, brilliant and paranoid, insightful and deluded, liberating and oppressive, humanitarian and enabler of violence. We cannot resolve these contradictions by choosing one side. We must hold them together, acknowledging that the same thinker produced profound insights and dangerous ideas, sometimes in the same work, sometimes in the same sentence. 3 centuries after his birth, Rousseau remains relevant because modern tensions he identified persist. We still struggle to balance individual rights and common good. We still question whether progress is genuine improvement. We still long for authenticity while performing social roles. We still feel alienated by civilization while depending on it. We still pursue equality while accepting hierarchy. We still seek community while valuing autonomy. Rousseau does not solve these tensions. He shows they exist and explores their dimensions, sometimes brilliantly, revealing aspects no one else saw, sometimes disastrously, proposing solutions that multiply problems, always intensely, passionately, personally, making abstract philosophy concrete and urgent. Was he dangerous? Yes. His ideas enabled horrors, but dangerous is not the same as worthless. We learn from dangerous ideas, sometimes more than from safe ones. We understand totalitarianism better by studying its intellectual origins. We appreciate liberal democracy's modesty by seeing utopian alternatives' catastrophes. We value pluralism by understanding unity's costs. Rousseau's life ended quietly at Hermenonville, but his influence was just beginning. The books he left behind would inspire revolutions, reshape education, transform literature, influence political theory for centuries. They would also contribute to some of history's worst atrocities. Both outcomes flow from the same source: a man who saw problems others missed, articulated longings others felt, promised solutions others wanted, and created concepts others weaponized. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the watchmaker's son who became a philosopher, the Genevan exile who influenced France, the social critic who could not function in society, the lover of nature who lived in cities, the champion of equality who subordinated women, the educator who abandoned children, the friend who saw enemies everywhere, the seeker of authenticity who performed constantly, the man who wanted to free humanity and showed how to enslave it. His monument is not the Pantheon tomb, but the ideas still circulating in political theory, educational practice, environmental movements, identity politics, communitarian critique, romantic aesthetics, confessional literature. Some of these ideas advance human flourishing, others enable human destruction. Often the same idea does both, depending on context and application. This is his true legacy. Not simple good or simple evil, but complex, contradictory, permanently challenging mixture of insight and error, liberation and oppression, beauty and horror. 3 centuries later, we are still wrestling with Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We will be for centuries more. Not because he was right, but because he was brilliant, dangerous, and unforgettable. The questions he raised remain urgent. The answers he gave remain inadequate. The task of learning from him without repeating his errors remains unfinished.